to destroy the very famous and beloved State Street, they would never think to steal a vote, or as many may be necessary to win, especially with their overwhelming intensity to get rid of Trump. No, the Democrats and media tell us there is no evidence of voter fraud. Well, is there any reasonable doubt? Let me repeat that again. Is there any reasonable doubt that vote fraud or voter fraud did not occur? What about the red light some of you may have gone through on your way here this morning, assuming no camera? There is no evidence that you went through the red light. I learned from a police detective who had investigated voter fraud and wrote a 67-page report that substantiated voter fraud occurred in Milwaukee in 2008. They do it, he told me, by maintaining a level of chaos. Then everything takes care of itself by people finding ways to get those extra votes. Or, for larger groups, an informant is needed to prove fraud. From experience, we all know that once a ballot goes in the machine, things become much more difficult. For example, to just check out one complaint of voter fraud, it might take a team of investigators a half a day to a day, just for one voter. Almost always there is neither the will nor the money to pursue the possible fraud, and the fraud continues to go on and on. In the rare instance where someone is caught, usually they are never prosecuted, all one has to say is, I do not know. So everyone knows that he or she, if caught, nothing will happen. However, this time, it looks like it could be different. There is the will, and there is the money, and there is the desire to investigate possible fraud after the election is over. But what happened in Wisconsin that cost the 20,000 vote loss? What is all we are talking about? You know, it's 20,000 votes, 3 words. It's mail-in voting. Over the 9 months or so, both in Wisconsin and throughout the country, the Dems did everything possible to change the election laws through examples, more than a dozen lawsuits in Wisconsin against the Wisconsin Election Committee. Their reasoning, the pandemic, their idea is to take away the legislative statute, mail-in ballot legislation safeguards in place to prevent fraud. Mail-in voting is much less secure than in-person voting. The system is set up where the persons check in, they show their ID, they fill out the ballot, and they vote. These safeguards are not in place for absentee ballots and allow an environment outside anyone's control for fraud to happen much more easily than in-person voting. I can fill in an absentee ballot application for someone else. I'm not even required to sign it. And that person can then have that ballot sent everywhere one wants. And I would suspect that at least one person in the entire state of Wisconsin filled out an absentee ballot application for someone, not him or herself. I myself received 3 applications for an absentee ballot from outside groups, plus the one from the Wisconsin Election Commission. These were sent to everyone by outside groups. One friend of mine received one addressed to someone she bought the house from over 20 years ago. So you ask me, what discrepancies did I see on the November 3rd election day in Milwaukee, or specific items which, in my opinion, affected the election day vote? First, let me tell you what I saw on election day. In the city of Milwaukee, and this is outside of the free food and the free items that were given out that during this election that we had the blessing of the Wisconsin Election Commission, I spent time going around to many of the polling places which I had visited many times over my past 20 years as a city of Milwaukee election commissioner. From my observations, talking with each observer and the polling place election staff, they were running extremely well, as they had been prior to the catastrophic election in April, where not only was a person absentee stopped, but 180 polling places were reduced to 5 voting centers with 20,000 votes cast at each place, undoubtedly causing major suppression for the black vote and others. Even the very liberal Brennan Center for Justice in New York said the black vote was reduced by 15 to 18%. Now, I obviously didn't go to the polling place that the gentleman just spoke about prior to what I'm saying here. But I spent very little time at Central Count. As some people have reported, it was very difficult for any observer to see anything. One strange item did happen in the city of Milwaukee. A very efficient system is set up to collect ballots from the chiefs of each polling place. Then the ballots are in assorted materials are placed in a covered truck, taken to a warehouse with a police escort. This time, there was no trucks, apparently a lack of coordination, or there was said to be a lack of coordination to rent the truck between the Election Commission and the Department of Public Works. This reminded me, for some reason, of, quote, all trucks broke down in 2000 election. That was a 5,000 vote difference between Gore and Bush, if you remember. And all the ballots were stored very unsecurely in the libraries for pickup the next day. All ballots and stuff were put into SUVs and with a police escort taken to the warehouse this year. We did have watchers at all three locations following these SUVs to the warehouse with the police. In terms of the recount, the city of Milwaukee rented the entire exhibition floor at the Milwaukee Convention Center. They set up 150 tables with plexiglass barriers. They set limits on the observers. Nice setup, but no one could see anything. The distance between the masked clerks counting envelopes or ballots and the masked observer was at least 6 to 7 feet with a plexiglass partition in between, and that's sitting down. And should the observer wish to stand up, it was at least 8 feet. The Trump lawyers complained, but to no avail. So certainly none of the Republican observers could see much. And in addition, the Biden observers apparently had been taught how to taunt and try to harass the Trump observers, something apparently the Trump campaign failed to include in its pre-observer training. I wish to bring this matter to the board of canvassers there, along with a safety concern I had, but the Biden attorney strongly objected, so I was not allowed to speak. There are hundreds of affidavits attesting to these facts. The city of Milwaukee was careful to close the slot in the plexiglass partition between the observer and clerk for added safety. The other non-Milwaukee municipalities were not. I tried to show and talk to the county clerk and assistant clerk to that, but no avail. They obviously did not care. This was in great contrast to Madison. There, since the Democratic observers were not concerned, they sat in the back row and they let the Republican observers sit right next to the plexiglass to watch the counting of each envelope and each ballot. One of the head Trump attorneys there did tell me he had to fight for that the first day. Now, where did the 20,000 vote difference come from? I'll briefly discuss the following. First, the famous Eric moving list of still 130,000 unaccounted for registered voters. Wisconsin Election Commission sending out 2.7 million absentee ballot applications, with tens of thousands of these applications being returned with no such address and so forth. Green Party ballot access denial. In nursing homes, special voting deputies were not permitted, with post office obviously dropping thousands of ballots off at these places. Indefinitely confined, 4 times the number as before. Ballot harvesting, plans by 29 organizations plus the Democratic Party to collect ballots. Drop boxes. Where did 500 drop boxes come from? First, a July 20, 2019 list is 93 to 95% accurate, indicated 230 registered voters had moved, died, etc. The Wisconsin Election Commission staff and commissioners unanimously decided to keep all 230 people to stay on the voting rolls until April of 2021. Since then, approximately 130,000 still remain unaccounted for, and the commission now splits 3-3, and thanks to 2 split state Supreme Court decisions, these 130,000 were kept in the rolls for the November election. Presumably sent absentee ballot applications by outside groups, as I had previously discussed for myself. Hopefully it will be determined by the parties how many of these people actually voted by mail or otherwise. Second, the Wisconsin Election Commission sent out 2.7 million absentee ballot applications. The staff tells me tens of thousands of these return envelopes have been received back, but no accountability prior to the election. How many of these people may have voted anyway? Third, The Green Party, with its perfect nominating petition, was given incomplete and inaccurate information by the Wisconsin Election Commission staff. And then the 3 Democratic commissioners, with a 4-3 Supreme Court decision, kept them off the ballot. Would this have been 10 or 15,000 less for Biden? Kanye West tried to get on the ballot. The West attorney arrived at the office building for WEC with the nominating petitions at 4:55 and attempted to get in the building. Surprisingly, no WEC staff member was there to open the door. So at 5 minutes, so she was at the door at 5 o'clock and 14 seconds, walked through the door, too late, even though she had more than enough signatures. How many votes was this? 4. Wisconsin Election Commission, certainly not a public health expert, but we did do a good job keeping the polling places safe. And its ultimate wisdom refused to allow special voting deputies in the nursing assisted living to provide a safe way for residents to vote. An MD working in the COVID-19 clinic with a master's in public health from Harvard, laid out to me how this could be done safely, in person or virtual, no interest. Consequently, thousands upon thousands of ballots were dropped off by the post office at these facilities for the staff to handle. I might mention that fraud in nursing homes goes back and is documented to George Washington's day. How many of our senior citizens wanted to vote for Trump actually had a ballot which so reflected? 5, indefinitely confined, about 70,000 statewide, approximately 6,000 in the city of Milwaukee before the April election. The 5,000 to 6,000 number has been the same for my 20 years as a Milwaukee election commissioner. The Dane County, Milwaukee County clerk suggested to the media, that if you did not want to send in your voter ID to vote by mail, just say you're indefinitely confined. The state Supreme Court chastised them for this, and they said they would not do it again. Without adequate guidance from the Wisconsin Election Commission staff for the November election, there were close to 240,000, a 3 to 4 times increase. Mail ballots will go out to these people or to that address forever as long as they vote each time. With saying that you're indefinitely confined when you are not the same as lying to an election official, which is a felony. A Legislative Reference Bureau memo dated March 26, 2020 indicates that somebody falsely claiming to be indefinitely confined could be subject to a felony for lying under oath. So who knows? It's the same as lying to an election official. 6, what about 4 years ago when the legislature said if the address of the witness for an absentee ballot is missing, the ballot must not be counted? What did this Wisconsin Election Commission say? Their guidance then was the clerk must, M-U-S-T, fill in the address with information obtained from any source, and that could be interpreted even the internet. 7, did you know that in Wisconsin ballot harvesting is legal? Another precedent started many years ago with the Wisconsin State Board, the Government Accountability Board, and now with the Wisconsin Election Commission. Does anyone really think it was the intent of the Republican legislature to allow ballot harvesting? I received a letter from some 29 to 39 organizations asking me, please do not stop our ability to pick up ballots from our members. The Minnesota law says one can pick up 3 absentee ballots, but number 4 is a felony. Maybe we should look at that here. Yeah. I'm sorry? Okay.
Nothing, that made me gasp.
1 minute? Okay. I talked about the drop boxes. I still wanted to talk about that. And you can easily see how these actions of the Election Commission staff or other actions, not to mention the unseen activity that could take place with all the 2 million plus absentee ballots, is not hard to account for. But I think one thing that's going to happen is people are concerned this time. There's the resources, there's the money, there's the desire, and people demand it, that these will be followed through. So I hope to have an opportunity to present my suggestions for the legislative action to help clear up these many controversies and important problems that exist with the current Wisconsin election system the next time around. Thank you very much.
All right, very good. The first question comes from Senator Bernier.
Thank you, Mr. Spindell. You know, I've had many media types contact me, Wisconsin State Journal recently, and talk about why we're, excuse me, why we're concerned about voter fraud, and there isn't enough of it to be concerned about, and a lot of those arguments. And of course, and I know we want to make sure that our electoral process is of high integrity and would discourage any and all fraud if at all possible. And this is why we have these hearings and why we address this. But my question is this, because I think this, and I'm going to think it out loud, and I know this isn't politically correct, so you're all going to probably gasp, but why aren't my Democrat friends as concerned about voter fraud as we are? They should be. And so the question is, do they think the voter fraud that occurs is actually done by Democrats and not done by Republicans, and therefore we shouldn't, Democrats don't want to address it? And so my question to you, as being a member of the Wisconsin Election Commission, because to be perfectly honest, I have taken an oath of office to uphold the Constitution of the United States and the Constitution of the state of Wisconsin. And if I see some law that is not being followed, it is incumbent upon me to address it, even if it's a Republican doing it. So that's my job, that I take very seriously. So I want to know, during the John Doe investigation, you may realize that there was a Republican who, I believe, filled out 5 ballots during the Walker recall petition, and I am sure he was prosecuted. So that is just as wrong as if Democrats do it, and so clearly some Republicans do also commit voter fraud. But I want to know from you, are you familiar with any Democrats coming to the Wisconsin Election Commission or contacting you in regard to voter fraud concerns?
No, what I've learned, and I've been involved in politics since I've been 2 years old, the Democrats have learned that in order to get any of their wonderful policies into the process and into effect, they have to win the elections. And therefore, I think some of them may look at the ends justify the means in order to do that. I have not had any Democrat come to me and complain. I have a lot of Democratic friends, but I probably have more Republican friends that are very much involved in Republican activities. And also, the fraud seems to occur in Democratic cities because that's where the large number of votes are. That's where most things can happen. So I don't know if that answers your question, but one thing that the Democrats wanted to do is reduce the safeguards on the legislation and the various laws that are in effect to keep mail balloting safe. And I think that's a pretty good indication of what the intent is. Millions of dollars of legal fees just to do that.
Okay, we have multiple questions, but we're only going to have time for one more. We're going to go to Senator Darling.
Thank you very much. Thank you for being here, Bob. Appreciate it. Question for you. We've heard today, and we've heard many times, that the Wisconsin Election Commission chooses not to follow statutes. We've heard many cases of that today. What can be done by the commission to abide by be in compliance with the statutes? What action could you take yourselves to be legally enforcing the law? I mean, this is just unacceptable. Their election commission doesn't choose to be compliant in every case.
Well, I think there's a major problem, and this goes back to the Wisconsin Election Board, and I happen to be a City of Milwaukee election commissioner there, so I've been involved one way or another with the 3 boards. Back then, the GAB and whatever precedent comes up. Either the election commission members come up with some idea, or the staff comes up with some idea by itself, and that is kept going forever and ever and ever. And going back to the Wisconsin State Election Board, the guidance for absentee ballots then was you can pick up as many as you want. That continued to the GAB, and that continued up to when we discussed it here at the Wisconsin Election Commission, where a 3-3 vote would keep it that way still. We must do something about getting rid of these precedents, because it gives the staff certain abilities to really overrule the wishes of the commission. So I'd say one of the main things needs to be to do that, and the second thing needs to be to limit even more than we did the delegation of authority to the staff. I was at the meeting in the Wisconsin State Election Board when the commissioners there gave the administrator that ability, the delegation of authority. And I said at that time to myself, boy, that's a problem. And when I had my orientation for the Wisconsin Election Commission, I asked about that, and it was still there. And we did a great deal to reduce that, but I think that needs to be reduced a great deal more so that the election commissioners actually run the organization. The six of us together on an issue, sometimes and oftentimes we've been able to work out a good solution to some of these things. Before I got on in October, there was 97% 6-0 vote. I've changed that. It's much less than that now, but the 6-0 votes we have now, I think, are very, very good in terms of representing both the Republican Party and the Democrat Party. But any time that if we like the precedent there and it comes up, it needs to be changed. The three Republicans might say, "Hey, we want to keep this, so we're not going to let it get changed." And I think the staff has to look at statutes. What do the statutes say? But they also need to look at what is the legislative intent. And this is something, and I'm not sure that you could ever have a nonpartisan staff. I think that's probably impossible. And maybe there's some solutions to that. But I'm especially with the new Democratic chair in there. Seems to me that the staff is favorably inclined towards the Democrats.
All right, very good. Thank you for testifying today. Much appreciated. Next, we're going to go to Bart Williams. Thanks to our staff for cleaning up the desks today. I appreciate that. Trying to keep everybody as safe as possible.
Good afternoon. Thanks for letting me testify. My name is Bart Williams, a Wisconsin resident. I was an election observer at Central Count in Milwaukee on Election Day. I also observed the so-called Democracy in the Park on October 3rd. I also participated in the recount in Milwaukee and Madison. I arrived at Central Count on November 3rd, 2020 at 6 a.m., but was not allowed by a posted guard in the lobby to go to the Central Count area floor, the 4th floor, until 7 o'clock. Then I had to wait in line, present photo ID, sign in, and await instructions from the ballot processing counting leadership staff. Thus, I was not able to actually start observing until at least 7:30 a.m. I was excluded from at least the first full 30 minutes observing the ballot processing counting. And by the way, I was in the first group up the elevators, so nobody could observe, of the observers, could observe those first 30 minutes. Claire Woodall-Vaugh, Executive Director of the Milwaukee Election Commission and in charge of Central Count, and many supervisors refused to allow me to remain in an unobtrusive area of the ballot processing counting location from which I reasonably could see and hear what was occurring for the vast majority, at least 2/3 of the tables being used for ballot processing and counting. Ms. Woodall-Vaugh and many supervisors made it difficult for election observers to truly observe all ballots being processed at all times, something the public was supposed to be able to do in the name of honest, free, fair, and transparent ballot processing and counting. First, they allowed only one chair for every 4 tables, and if more than one person was at that chair, standing or sitting, a supervisor made us go to the edge of the row of tables, which was even further away. For a visual of this, imagine that the chair is Omaha, Nebraska, and you have to try to simultaneously monitor Washington State, Maine, Florida, and California. Nobody can do this. You don't have eyes in the back of your head. Remember, if somebody was at that chair, you couldn't even stand near the chair. So it was all for one person or nothing, or you were pushed to the side. Also, there was a row of tables, so there was 13 feet about between these tables, the first row of tables. There was a parallel set of 2 more sets of tables. another 8 to 10 feet out from that, and another 8 to 10 feet out from that. And so by the time, and you weren't allowed to go down the walkways to those second and third rows of tables, so try to observe meaningful ballot details, such as whether there's a witness's address or a reason marked on the ballot for why the ballot was duplicated, such it was destroyed. You can't do it from those distances. So what I'm saying is this. At most, we were able to observe 25 to 33% of the ballots, at most, because the second and third rows of tables on each side of that wide aisle were barred from us from being able to access. You were simply too far away to be able to see anything, and they knew this. Another issue with that is indefinite confined. If you look down the ballot certification, right near where the address is, it would say indefinite if that person claimed they were indefinitely confined. You can't see that key detail at these distances. So we undercounted how many indefinitely confined ballots there might have been on the certificates because they didn't let us see them. So once you left that chair, which eventually you have to go to the bathroom, the Democrat runs and jumps in that chair, and you literally can only observe from the side, to continue my analysis, from the Atlantic Ocean. You can only maybe barely see Maine and Florida. You can't see the other tables. And so it was hours before I could even see those other two tables again. That's why I'm saying probably it's closer to 25% is the most we could see of all the ballots and certifications. Total quality concepts tell you that when you have a highly manual process like ballot processing and counting, there is significant variation in manual processes. Therefore, if we were not able to see most of the manual processes involved in these ballot processing and counting, it's more accurate to say we saw none of the process than to say we saw 100% of the process. So keep that in mind. Only 15 total observers from each party or independents were allowed in central count per shift. This was way too low of a number to allow anything approaching full observation access to all the tables. At best, we could maybe only cover or observe 20 to 25% of all the tables, of all the total tables, many, many, many dozens, with 15 observers, again, at best. The small total number of observers from each party was also a huge and, I believe, illegal access restriction. With 45 to 60 observers of each affiliation allowed in at one time, social distancing could have been maintained and transparency and lawful public access greatly increased. I hereby dispute as false any excuse by election officials to the contrary. Since ballot processing counting is a highly manual process, again, it was important that we got access to all of the process, but we didn't. So I picked up a form to start tracking the voter name and ballot ID number of each ballot certification envelope on which I saw issues. Occasionally, since they were talking through masks, and again, there's a team of tables and you're sitting behind them, you can't hear them all the time because they're talking towards each other and they're talking through a mask. So occasionally I'd have to ask, can you repeat that last name again? Or I didn't catch the last three numbers of that ballot number. They got annoyed at me and didn't want to do it, but they did it. Well, after 5, the person got up, got a supervisor, and I was barred from ever continuing my log again because they don't want us to have specifics on actual issues that we're seeing. That, again, is a problem. I think it's an illegality. Overall, Ms. Woodall-Vaugh and the rest of her staff were demonstrably hostile, including raising their voices, dismissing every single objection we had, and so forth, to our questions and observing in every interaction we had with them. They created a very hostile environment for re-election observers. Fairly early during first shift, Ms. Woodall-Vaugh twice made loud announcements to all people present that if ballot processors counters came across a ballot certification envelope with a missing address for the witness, they could go to the computer, look up the witness's address, and write it in. I immediately objected to this due to, among many valid other concerns, what about a witness with a very common name, such as John Smith? I was told by a supervisor that the worker could just assume it was the John Smith on the same street as the voter, or else the closest one to the voter's address. I said, what about if that John Smith lived across town? They didn't care. They were just going to put down the one that was convenient, and they didn't care that technically this is ballot tampering, and it's illegal in violation of both sections 6.87 subsection D and 6.87 subsection 9 of the Wisconsin statutes. So despite Dean Knutson's false testimony this morning, a formal complaint regarding this was formally filed with the Wisconsin Elections Commission by David Bolter on November 30th, 2 business weeks ago. My sworn declaration, which is evidence of wrongdoing, is part of that complaint. Mr. Knutson knows this and has for almost the last 2 weeks, but he still testified falsely anyway. You will hear from Mr. Bolter 2 speakers from now. The election officials told us not to expect many skinny or express ballots, but there were many. I estimate they comprise 25 to 35% of all the ballots I saw. I was told by a supervisor that express ballots came from 1 or 2 places, either building, and she didn't say the other one. She said they were for people who had a hard time writing. They could use a special keyboard or machine at one of those 2 buildings to generate an express ballot. This seems very suspicious to me. Unlikely there were that many people who actually had a hard time writing. Plus, two supervisors acknowledged there were a lot more express ballots than they had expected. Given the newness, large number, and highly susceptible to fraud and abuse nature of these express ballots, I would hope that they were audited closely and heavily during the recount, but I suspect that they were not. As a direct result of Claire Woodall-Vogts and other supervisor acts, I was unable to fulfill my responsibilities or exercise my rights to meaningful observation as an election observer at Central Count in Milwaukee on Election Day, November 3rd. I also personally witnessed the Democrats' unlawful actions in at least 3 major ways during their scam Democracy in the Park here in Madison on October 3rd. And if you want details, you can ask questions, and I'll give you those 3 specific ways that I believe the law was broken. So, overall, I most respectfully and urgently beg and plead of you, as the Wisconsin legislature and our direct representatives of we the people, to please do your sworn and sacred jobs. Ms. Bernier just mentioned it a bit ago, as our elected officials, legislators accountable to we the people, to uphold and defend not only the U.S. Constitution, but the Wisconsin Constitution as well. You must seriously question and challenge why we are not allowed to observe ballot processing and counting at Central Count in Milwaukee. The reason? They were hiding their massive election law breaking and stealing the election from we the people. Please, please have courage. Do your jobs. Insist on a full forensic audit of all voting machines, especially Dominion ones, and voting records. Insist on a full forensic audit of all the ballot drop boxes and a full signature match of all absentee ballots. Properly and fully investigate the thousands of highly suspicious express ballots. Require a ballot application for every absentee ballot as required by Wisconsin law. Investigate and prosecute the tens of thousands of people who fraudulently claimed indefinitely confined, and for all those who lied, prosecute them for election fraud. Prosecute all who participated in this election lawbreaking, up to and including members of the Wisconsin Elections Commission. Finally, once you have fully determined the truthful, accurate, honest, and legal winner of the November 3rd, 2020 election, President Trump and Vice President Pence, please, please do your sworn and sacred duty under Article 2, Section 1 of the U.S. Constitution and select all 10 of Wisconsin's electors to the Electoral College for President Trump and Vice President Pence. You must get this election, November 3rd, 2020, right. We can't just say, forget this election, it doesn't matter, we'll fix it going forward. We're going to have so much problems in fixing election laws and whatnot if the wrong people are elected this time. There are many of us who were there at Stop the Steal on the Capitol steps on Monday that care about this election, and I feel very much worried that many of the legislature just want to say, what was done, moved on. This election needs to be gotten right, or we're going to lose our precious paid-for in blood for 231 years, free USA Republic forever. Article 2, Section 1 gives you, the legislature, the clear right to select Wisconsin's 10 electors to the Electoral College. Act 334, passed in 1973, may delegate selection to the winning party. But if the winning party is not truthfully, rightfully, or legally the Democratic Party, then they do not get to select Wisconsin's 10 electors. The legislature can and should then select all 10 electors for President Trump and Vice President Pence. According to relevant case law in 1892 and more recently in 2000, Bush versus Gore, a state's legislature can never abdicate its U.S. constitutional duty to select its electors, nor delegate such duty via statute, nor to any administrative agency. That is because this duty is specifically given to the state legislatures by Article 2, Section 1 of the U.S. Constitution, which has not changed. I am very concerned that some legislators may be searching for political cover to avoid standing up and doing the right thing. That would be a critical mistake for all of us, for our nation, and for all our individual liberties and the rest of our country and the rest of our history. I'm asking you now, please, I'm begging you with you, please have the courage. Do the right thing. You have the authority, duty, and power to select Wisconsin's 10 electors. Please stand up now for honest, fair, and legally conducted elections. Your state, your nation, and we the people need you now to get the November 3rd, 2020 election right. Please do the right thing. Everything is at stake with this election. Thank you.
Very good. Our first question is going to come from Representative Motto.
Thank you, Chairman. Mr. Williams, thank you for being here. Can you help me understand how we go about doing that? Does that require just a resolution, in your opinion? And I certainly will take it up with Ledge Council, but how would one go about doing that? Do you have an opinion on that?
I think you could do a joint resolution that, after proper investigation, and I think this is a good step today, would allow you to make a determination that due to all of the irregularities, fraud, stealing, whatever you want to call it, cutting the corners, administrative liberties by the Wisconsin Election Commission, many of which I don't believe are authorized.
No, I get the background for why one would want to do it. I'm asking how. So you're saying we simply do that with a resolution, is what you're saying?
I'm saying that I believe that based on what you discover, that you cannot trust the current results of this election, and through a joint resolution, you could authorize the selection of the 10 electors for the Republican Party.
We'll, Mr. Chairman, we ought to get an answer on what is our capabilities, and I know we've consistently come up with questions as to can we do this or can't we do that, and I think there's a lot of us that are not attorneys that don't understand fully what we can or cannot do, or how we might go about doing that. I understand why one would want to do that. My question is, how would one want to do that if one would want to do that? And I don't think we have an answer on whether that's true. And no disrespect to Mr. Williams, whether he thinks that is statutorily available to us or not is not what I need is a better answer than that.
Yeah. So perhaps we could take a look at Ledge Council's memo and then maybe expound upon that. Maybe their memo isn't completely specific enough, and maybe we can kind of look beyond that. But
and it kind of goes to Mr. Sortwell's question. I mean, do we have the ability to get a preponderance of opinion or a preponderance of evidence from our attorney team rather than a single look at it? So again, no disrespect to a single attorney, but I think sometimes several set of eyes are better. And then the last point I would say, sir, is that time is of the essence. And so when might we be able to ascertain whether we have that ability or not?
We will ask for a Ledge Council to review that memo and see if they agree or not agree. And I would ask for that as soon as possible.
Thank you, sir.
Let's go to Representative Sortwell.
Sir, Mr. Chairman, I do have one suggestion if you'd indulge me for 30 seconds. This may be a little expensive, but recognize it would be a one-time cost, but think about this. I sent you a recent copy, many of you, a copy of the Epoch Times quoting Harvard law professor Alan Dershowitz. I believe that as an outside expert constitutional law lawyer, he would be able to provide you an idea of what you could do specifically to get that, because he stated in that Epoch Times article that this avenue is very much available to you. So why not pay the fee and get a true outside opinion? Just a thought.
All right. Next. Yeah, Representative Sortwell is next.
Thank you. Are you aware of the lesser magistrate doctrine? Okay. Because the lesser magistrate doctrine basically holds that when one level of government fails in its duty, then the other level of government is responsible then to uphold what the other one should have done in the first place. So you're aware that if one area fails, it then becomes incumbent on the other one to uphold that. Are you aware of this doctrine?
I am.
Okay. So when Ledge Council was talking earlier, did you hear any consideration of that long-standing American doctrine that was the foundation of the American Revolution?
I heard him say a few things. It is concerning to me that that here we are this far after the election, and I understand there's lawsuits in the interim and whatnot, but that here we are, on December 11th, theoretically 3 days before before the Electoral College electors cast their vote, and we're just now uncovering some of the evidence that's key. I guess in the interim, I would suggest this. A joint resolution holds back on your electors from making their vote in the Electoral College on Monday, because you're in the discovery process of significant facts and findings of lawbreaking here. Just like the gentleman, I think it was Mr. Klein earlier, saying, look, we don't have to prove fraud. All you have to prove is that significant election laws were broken here in this election cycle. And clearly you have mountains of evidence, and I'll put my hand on the Bible in court any day and tell you what I just told you again and again and again, because I'm telling the truth. We have a lot of evidence here that things were done wrong, enough to easily change the outcome of the election.
All right, next we're going to go to Senator Darling.
Issue of what authority we have. We've really looked at this significantly, and it seems to me that the U.S. Constitution gave the states, the legislatures, the authority to choose the electors. This legislature in Wisconsin changed our law to define that our selection of the electors would be by this group of 5 Republicans, 5 Democrats chosen by the parties, and then that would constitute the electors, and that's who would cast our votes. So it's my understanding, unless we change our law, we aren't able to do what you're suggesting. It's very frustrating, but I think that you have to come to some conclusion about what we can do, because I don't want to give our citizens the thought that we can do more than we're doing, because we care about this election. But our law is the law, and I guess one of the things I'm most concerned about is all the lack of compliance with our statutes and our laws that we have put on the books specifically to control elections, or to put in statutes into law how elections should be handled. And it seems today and other days those issues, our statutes, are not being followed.
Well, I wouldn't disagree with you, but I would say a couple of things. One, it always defaults to the Constitution the U.S. Constitution is the supreme law of the land.
Right.
Look up Article 2, Section 1, Clause 2. The legislature clearly has the duty, authority, and a power to select its electors. If there's a statute from Wisconsin, Act 334, passed in 73, in violation with that, ultimately the U.S. Constitution, Article 2, Section 1, prevails over that. Secondly, I would argue that if you give the selecting of the electors power to the winning party, and you discover through your fraud investigation and forensic audits, of which many of us have asked for, I am 100% confident, and I'll eat my words if I'm wrong, that you'll find the winning party was truly the Republican Party, and all 10 electors should be cast for President Trump and Vice President Pence. Third of all, if you do find fraud, that's a high bar to get to. I acknowledge that. But think of when you buy a house, right? You have to fill out the real estate condition report. That's been a law since like 2005, I think. If you commit fraud on that and don't tell about 5 or 6 things, the roof leaks, the basement leaks, whatever, and I buy that house from you in reliance on you saying, nope, there's no problems in my property condition report, and later on I find out very quickly after that there were those problems, I can do one of 2 things. I can take it to court and make you take back your house in the extreme, but it's been done, or I can go ahead and get all those issues fixed that you fraudulently did not report to me and charge you for all of those expenses. But in either event, the result is the same. Fraud sets aside my requirement to comply with that contract. In the same vein, I believe fraud would set aside any duty to delegate that power down to the winning party and take it back to the legislature, which you always have per the supreme law of land, Article 2, Section 1 of the U.S. Constitution.
All right, last question to Representative Monko.
So I apologize. I just have a bit of a preamble there. So I think to reiterate the question then, or restate the question that I asked just previously, Mr. Chairman, is then I would want clarification on what Mr. Williams just said, that if that set-aside provision does exist. And then number 2, to Senator Darling's point, Mr. Williams used the word may, that we may do this or may do that, and that's different than shall. So I'd be curious to know if Senator Darling's right that we statutorily move that into a different place, but if it does say may, then that would give me some different context. But that wasn't my question. My question was, what I would also like to know, what I'd really like to know, and let me just make sure I get this phrasing correctly, is that I'd also like an answer on the Milwaukee Election Commission. By design, is there any language in there that, because of their very existence, would give them the authority to think in any way or act in any way to choose or pick Wisconsin election laws? Whose jurisdiction would supersede anything that a Milwaukee Election Commission themselves would dictate? I'm curious to know, if there's any way that they would erroneously think that their laws and their procedures would supersede our own.
Are you speaking regarding the city or the county? Just to clarify things as best as I can for Ledge Council. I can only imagine they'll have to look something up for that.
Yeah, I'll get additional details with you.
Go ahead.
The Milwaukee Election Commission, the Milwaukee County Election Commission, now works under the authority of the county clerk. Back in the day, they took it completely away from the county clerk. You may remember voting, I think you might have voted in favor of putting that back in under the county clerk. So the county clerk and all municipal clerks have to follow state election law. And so when there's an election law, it'll say the county clerk shall and the municipal clerk shall and the election commission.
Got it.
So they are not exempt from any law that pertains to municipal clerks or county clerks at all. It's just that they have a commission that was appointed to sort of help us deal with the issue we see today. The large municipality with all of the responsibilities of running election is extraordinary. And the commission was really designed to oversee, to make sure all of the process and procedures and laws are followed. I am not sure the commission understands how important their job is that they are kind of, the county clerk has the county caucus or canvass, the board of canvass. So it's a county clerk, a Democrat and a Republican board of canvass that makes sure that those election results are accurate. The election commissions in Milwaukee, and only Milwaukee, are to make sure that all of the processes and procedures and election laws are followed. And from what I gathered from the history behind it, and I don't know if Ledge Council can elaborate on it, but it's because it's the largest municipality with so many people, to make sure it's all done well. And I think they've failed.
Thank you, Senator, and your personal experience in that is really valuable to me. Thank you.
All right, very good. We're going to go to our next witness, who is Paul Kramer. Thank you, Bart.
My name is Dr. Paul Kramer. I'm a resident of Lisbon, Wisconsin. I was a Trump campaign recount observer on Sunday, November 22nd. At approximately 10 a.m., myself and other Trump recount observers were led into the third floor room of the Wisconsin Center where the count took place. While I was looking for my assigned table, I was listening to a proceeding that was being broadcast over the public address speakers in the room. The Board of Canvassers and the attorneys for the Trump and Biden campaigns were discussing the fact that ballots were being run through counting machines after the room had been cleared of observers at the end of Saturday evening's recount activities. I found this very disturbing, and knowing that evidence of wrongdoing has a tendency to get lost, I clicked on my camera on my phone and recorded the discussion. I forwarded this recording to Representative Branchin for her attention, and she asked me to testify here today. I have a transcript of the recording here that I'd like to read from. This is one of the Trump attorneys talking during this conversation. It's, Mr. Chairman, I'd like to put on the record my observations of what I saw last night. The board, I believe, around, it's intelligible, 8 o'clock-ish, when we called it a day, called it a night, we were told that there were a few ballots that were going to be run. It took me a while to gather my things and speak with various people. It was about 8:30 when a gentleman came to me and said, "Do you know they're still running ballots over there?" I said, "That can't be." He said, "Well, yeah, look." I walked over there with Mr. Voiland. When I got there at approximately 8:30, 2 machines were running. The observer said that the third one had been running, but it was stopped, those machines. Mr. Voiland then went to try to locate someone and brought Mr. Christensen over. It was not until at least 8:35 that those machines were stopped. It wasn't a few ballots, and I understand that that was a reference to another machine at another location. I just want to put on the record that we were totally unable to observe any of that. I know the procedures. We just discussed them to be put in place. But it should not have happened, and the entire ward and everyone I am looking at was long gone by the time this all occurred, except for the clerk, as you're able to see. And this is just an indication that we have to tighten this ship up because we are floating in perilous waters here with these kinds of things going on. That was not a few ballots that were being run. It was stacks and stacks of ballots for at least a half an hour after the chair called adjournment. And that should not have happened. It goes on to explain more. I have a quote here from Christensen, the Board of Canvassers, the county clerk. He said, I would agree, it was not this much. There were stacks and stacks, and that is not acceptable. I would agree. And they go on to talk about how they remedied that. I don't really understand from this how they actually did remedy that. This discussion, along with other experiences I had at the recount, gives me no confidence in the integrity of this recount. I observed many other concerning things. When we went into the Wisconsin Center, we were told we could not have backpacks, purses, or bags. When I went in there, I saw several Biden observers with large camping-style backpacks, walking through the facility. Several of them were congregating down by where the ballots were kept and stored. They would form, against social distancing guidelines, they would form a group which blocked the ability to see what was going on behind them. What went on behind there, I have no idea, but they should not have been allowed, in my opinion, to be anywhere near those places where those ballots were stored. I observed a woman on the floor counting ballots and election materials, which was very unusual since there were several empty tables in the room where she could have put those things on those tables to sort them out and also have observation. She was in an area that was difficult to see, and she had boxes kind of stacked up, so it was difficult to see what she was doing back there. She was taking the ballots and running through them, ballots and envelopes, it looked like. I couldn't tell from that distance. I asked several of the Trump attorneys, what is going on there? What is that procedure, and why is that happening? And they tried to investigate, and they got no answer as to what she was actually doing there. There were several boxes, large, that you would get reams of paper in an office setting, large boxes like that. I was told that the tabulators were the only people who were allowed to handle election materials, which meant that the election materials were put in sealed bags and bins, and they were transported around in those bins. When it came time to count them, they would take them out of the bags, count them, put them back when they were done inside the seals, and moved on. I observed a man walking, actually this happened several times, walking around with a handful of ballots throughout the center. I don't know where he was going or coming. What he did with those ballots, I was unable to see. It's a very big room and hard to see, but I saw this guy walking around with ballots. The only people who were ever told to social distance were the Trump observers. I have many instances where the people, Biden observers, were close together. The recount workers were touching each other. They were sitting next to each other. But yet the Trump ballot observers had to be, I'll defer a little bit to Mr. Spendel's testimony too. I agree with what you had to be 6 feet back in a chair through plexiglass with a ballot worker going that fast. and you were supposed to be able to see what was on those ballots. It was completely impossible. The only two things that you could say to the election workers was, "I object," or "Please slow down." They would ignore anything else that you said to them. You could not ask them a question. You couldn't say anything else. If you said, "I object," most of the time they would stop. Sometimes they would continue. But if you said, "I object," they were supposed to stop. You had to go get an attorney. The attorney would come over, see what the issue was. They would have that ballot set aside or whatever the issue was, and they would continue. If you said slow down, sometimes they would slow down and sometimes they wouldn't. They would just continue taking the ballots across. I can't specifically attest to this, but I talked to other people who were there on Friday and Saturday, and they were telling me before I went in there that I should expect to walk into a room full of hate, which got my attention. They said that on Friday and Saturday, there were Biden observers who would scream obscenities in your ear while you were watching them you do your job. There was very little police presence there. There were a few sheriffs walking around, but I normally at a large event like a Bucks game or something, you would see police officers at the doors in specific areas. So if you needed a police officer, if someone had a health problem, something, you could go to those areas. But there was nobody at any of those, any exit or entrance points. They were kind of wandering around. In the beginning of it, we were getting some last-minute instructions from the Trump campaign lawyers on what we were supposed to be doing with the ballot counting, the ballot observations, and we had to move close to try and get them. It's a noisy area, so we were moving close. Well, then someone from a Biden observer would come and scream at us that we had to move back. So it was this game of moving forward and back for several minutes of trying to lean in to try and get the instructions, get screamed at, and then we would have to back up. At one point, a woman started screaming and very loudly at some people right next to me, and there was no police there, and so some Trump attorneys had to form like a wall to kind of keep her away from us in order for us to move away and continue the job. If normally I would expect that type of behavior to be taken care of by law enforcement of some kind. It was a very disturbing experience. I have absolutely no confidence in the integrity of this recount. I can't even believe it happened. I can't believe that anyone could say in the United States of America that type of thing was allowed. I was sick for 2 days afterwards with a headache. I don't have headaches. I don't see how we can have a democratic republic if this type of nonsense is allowed to occur. I was personally insulted by the comments in the media that said this was a smooth and fair procedure. I don't know. They were not in there. They were not in there. Or they're completely lying. I think that's all I have to say. Thank you.
Do we have any questions? Seeing none. Thank you, Dr. Kramer, for your testimony today. We've all been going for a while, so I think we're a little bit tired. We're going to go to Artis Cerny next.
It's a little wet. Do you have something dry? Oh. Could you whip out the chair a little? With your hanky. It's wet. It's not so bad.
Let's, why don't we do that while Kathy, if they're ready,
Okay.
Good afternoon. My name is Arta Cerny. I'm from Pewaukee, Wisconsin. Oh, this is all wet. Before I forget, I just want to say, if you folks take the time to go to WEC's front page, on the left-hand column, there's a spot that says complaint. So that's where you put your complaints that Dean Knudsen was talking about. It gives you a little tiny square, and you might have a 3-page story that you want to tell to them. You can't look back to see what you already wrote. It's like impossible. The last time I did a complaint, I freehand wrote it and sent it to Reed, and I said, here's my complaint. I find your complaint note on your website ridiculous. So just take a look at that, please. Okay. On Election Day, I observed at 4 polling locations in Milwaukee County. The first one was in Wauwatosa. The other 3 were in Milwaukee. When we asked the chiefs what they did with mail-in ballots that were brought into their polling place, they each had a different answer. So remember, this is Election Day, and we asked, what if somebody walks in with a mail-in ballot? What do you do? The first chief took them to the central count, which happened to be in the same building that he was in. At the second location, the next one spoiled the citizen's ballot and gave them a new ballot. At the third location, the chief refused to touch them, make them take him back to his car, and then when the person came back in, he gave him a ballot. The fourth person said he had not faced that problem yet and he'd deal with it when he got to it. So the third person was correct. He made the citizen actually take it back to his car, and when he came back in, he gave him a ballot. But it is clear, and I've been dealing with WEC a few years, WEC is responsible for creating this mail-in ballot fiasco and expecting clerks, chiefs, and poll workers to remember all of the directives, because there are so many, it's impossible. If you ever want to get a headache, go to WEC's website, go to Clerk Communications, and listen to some of the communications that WEC gives to their people. You can't understand it. It's literally impossible. Every time you folks did a law, WEC took that law and twisted it around until it met what they wanted to achieve. It was pretty unbelievable what they did with some of the statutes that you passed. Now, then I went out to Central Count that same day on Election Day. It was a farce. You could see nothing. It literally was a farce. I felt sorry for the man before me. I think he had these high expectations, but I know what kind of things go on in Milwaukee. I'm not going to re-explain to what he talked about, how this was a huge room, like a football field room. And they had pods. They had tables set up in cubicle areas. So around the aisles, you could sort of see something at a table, but you could not see any of the interior tables. There were some chairs at some of the interior tables. There was a Democrat woman that sat there the whole day, and how did I know she was a Democrat? Because she never watched the proceedings. She looked at her phone all day. The only time they brought their head up is when they thought you were trying to stop a vote from being counted. Then we got their attention. I finally went and stood next to this woman, even though she was sitting in the chair, because I wanted to see what was going on in the interior. And it didn't take long for one of the directors down there to come and tell me, you cannot stand here. And I said, but I want to stand here. I want to view what's going on here. If you keep up with this, you're going to get kicked out of here. You're out of here. So I thought, okay, I won't get kicked out. So I moved on and went someplace else. But that was the kind of atmosphere that we were dealing with down there. And one thing I want to bring up before I forget, that night I went home and I watched the news, and in Madison, the observers there were allowed to be right up to the table. In fact, I saw them putting ballots and envelopes up against the scratched up plexiglass that I was forced to try and look through. So how come Madison got treated that way and we got treated differently? So here again, we do not have fair situations going on in this state. Now, I just also want you to be aware of this fact. Since, and I guess it was Kevin Kennedy in 2016, gave the clerks the right to write in an address that was missing from the witness address on the envelope. But at that time, they could still use black and blue ink. It wasn't until this year that they were directed to use that red ink. And had they not used red ink, we never would have known that that was a directive that came from WEC. So I think it's important to realize that they knew they were doing something wrong. And they decided they'd put it in red because they didn't want to have to deny that there's something odd there. All I can tell you is it wasn't until this election that they were made to write those addresses in red. So try and figure that one out. Okay, so then we're moving on to my experience at the recount. Once again, it was a farce. 5 feet away from the edge, 3 feet away from the edge of the table, and then there was this scratched up plexiglass. You couldn't really see anything that was going on. I tried positioning my chair to a better position so I could see, and that is when the bullying and the badgering started. My chair was not positioned correctly. My toes were over the yellow line. My knees were over the yellow line. There were about 5 Democrats that started picking on me, and I mean picking on me. I hardly had a chance to even observe. They just kept at it. When I initially got there, I've been going to these things for a long time, so whenever I go, I sign in as an independent because I'm not talking for the Republican Party, and if I get in trouble, I don't want it to reflect on the Republican Party, so I've always signed in as an independent. I was told that there were 3 chairs in front of the tables, and one was for an independent, and one was for a Republican, and one was for a Democrat. Okay, so I sat in the independent chair. And I took the chair, but somehow the 5 goons that were intimidating me, when they found out I was an independent, their heads exploded. Then they really got bad. Why was I talking to the Republican attorney? Why was I doing this? Why was I doing that? I tried to explain to them that as an independent, I had the right to support the candidate of my choice. That didn't mean I was apolitical. The intimidation just got worse, so I decided this is hopeless. So I left. And I thought, okay, maybe if I just go to another part of the room. So I decided to go and watch the Milwaukee Election Commission for a while, because they were making they were holding court in the middle of the room. And I thought, well, okay, I'll go up there and just sit and relax and calm down. All of a sudden, I heard my name over the loudspeaker through the whole building. I never did hear what I was being accused of, but I was so incensed, I was shocked. I approached the table, I said, my name is Ardis Cerny, you just mentioned my name. What did I do wrong? And I said, I'm abhorred by the fact that you said my name over the loudspeaker without even talking to me first. They totally ignored me. I went and sat down. The chief judge, whatever his name is, he said, well, we've got to put a stop to this. Let's vote on removing the 3rd chair from in front of every table. So, of course, the commission is a 2-to-1, so the 2 people voted, and then they made a big deal about this workman coming out and getting all the 3rd chairs. Actually, it helped our guys get a little bit closer to where they could see better, so it was okay, actually. I wasn't too upset about it. The next day I did go back, but this time I was over against the far wall watching the big machines count ballots. But one of the goons was about 20 feet away. Ardis Cerny, I'm watching you. Okay, here it started all over again. Then I saw one of the other people that were giving me a hard time. What are you doing here? You got kicked out yesterday. I politely said that I did not get kicked out. I left of my own volition. All in all, the recount was a total waste of time, but it needed to be done so that the lawyers could go ahead, could move forward with doing whatever they had to do. Just got a couple of other comments. I have a couple things that I want you to be aware of. Here's another case of WEC breaking the law, okay? Wisconsin State Statute 6.86 sub 6 that says that if you received a ballot by mail and you spoiled it, you spilled coffee on it, something happened to it, the citizen is required to return the spoiled ballot to the clerk's office before they can receive a new one. But if you take a look on WEC's website, under spoiled absentee ballot guidance, there is a statement now that says you can spoil your ballot in writing by mail or email to the clerk. When did that happen? Every other situation, you spoil a ballot, you got to either mail it back into the clerk or you got to take it personally before they will give you another one. So how many people called in, never really spoiled the first ballot, got to vote. I mean, they're handing ballots out like they're candy, is what's going on up there. Now, last Friday, let me preface this with this. Okay, when I was observing at the recount, they brought out a wad of ballots. You know when you go to the Office Depot and you get a new ream of paper to put in your printer, and the ballots are perfectly in the plastic container, and you got to fan them a little bit so they loosen up? They brought out a wad of ballots, and I said to myself, those don't look like they've touched human hands. And I looked at them a little more, and I thought, well, they do have the creases in. And then I did ask Claire. I said, did you fold these pre-fold? Well, some of them we pre-folded. Okay, so I thought, well, maybe since the creases were all identical, maybe it does look like a pristine, but it just looks so perfect. So I did watch those being counted over at when they went to the big machines to be counted. But that still kind of haunts me, like, why did those ballots look so perfect? So last Friday, I did an open records request of Milwaukee County, who now has custody of the ballots and the envelopes and everything else. I have done this before in other years. I wanted to look at the physical properties of the ballots, the texture of the paper, the creases, the perfect bubbles. I wanted to actually count a couple of wards. I was told I would never be permitted to handle the ballots, ever. Now, I've heard and I've seen on TV that in other states, people are being allowed to look at the ballots and touch them and count them and do whatever. I am hoping that maybe one of you could help me get in to see some of these wards. I've got some numbers. So if anybody's interested in taking that a step further, please help me with that. I still cannot believe that in the interest of fair and honest elections, WEC did not stop the donation of millions of dollars to 5 of our cities. Did you in the legislature know that this was going on? Did you know? This is blatantly apprehensible. They were buying votes. This should have never been allowed. Who should have been the person to stop this? Who should have been the person to stop this? Who do we go to? What do we do? It's pretty unbelievable. Now, how do we correct this mess? I have an idea that I hope you will take me up on. Is there a page I can hand these out? I don't know if I have enough copies. It has been mentioned to do a forensic audit. You want to make a few more copies? I don't think I have enough. One of the ways that you could start a forensic audit, and you can get the results from it in a couple of days. I know it's Friday, you won't maybe get the results till Monday, but there's such a thing as the registration list alerts. These include names, addresses, and birth dates of every person in the statewide system. This list is a result of an instantaneous check that occurs when a registration is entered into the system. So in other words, as during in-person absentee and on election day when people fill out the registration form, it goes to the clerk's office, and then they have people there that are typing all the information that goes right into the system. But there's an instantaneous check that determines if that name is already in the system, or it looks like that name's already in the system. It also goes through a death database to see if that person has died in Wisconsin, and it goes through a felon list. So this registration list alert, if one of those 3 things waves a red flag, it goes to that municipality. And these registration lists alert, I think, occur at the very end of in-person absentee and on election day. Now, the clerks have 45 days to get all their registration information into the system. And I think it's December something, it's in a few days that their 45 days is up. But I would say take what's in the system and find out how many new registrations are either deceased, lots of duplicates, deceased felons or duplicates. I have here November 3rd, 2018, 3 days prior to the election, the number of registration list alerts in the system was a little over 8,000. On December 6th, after the election, there were 25,000 registration list alerts in the system. So there are a ton of people voting at the end of in-person absentee and on election day that shouldn't be. So that's number one. All I'm asking you to do is go to WEC and say, of the registrations that have just been put in, or you can start from October 1st, how many of them are in the registration list alert system, so you can find out, are they duplicates, are they deceased, are they felon? And remember, these people all got to vote. They all got a ballot and voted, okay? Another thing in a forensic investigation is the DMV check or the Social Security check. The DMV check is what is mandated by HAVA, the Help America Vote Act, to look to see, check the name, birth date, and identifying number of the citizen. So do not confuse this with ERIC. ERIC looks at name and address. The DMV check looks at name, birth date, and identifying number. And when I say identifying number, I'm talking about the driver's license, the state ID, or the last 4 digits of the Social Security number. So just so you know what kind of numbers I'm talking about, November 3rd, 2016, an open records request was made of WEC for the number of DMV non-matches in the system, 154,000. That's how many people we're talking about have failed this DMV check. Who doesn't remember their name, their birth date? Your driver's license number never changes. Okay, so WEC says there's spelling mistakes, whatever. So when a DMV check fails, it gets sent back to the clerk for the clerk to go and look in her paperwork, make sure she spelled the name right, make sure she got the birth. They recheck it and they send it back through the DMV check. So please, if you're going to do a forensic audit, do these 2 things. I hope you all got the piece of paper that explains this. Another thing I would hope you would look at is the indefinitely confined list. I don't know when the kerfluffle started. Was that like March 1st when those 2 county chairs said, oh yeah, you can sign up for this? I would say look and see who all signed up for the indefinitely confined list from March 1st up to the election. See how many of them voted. The people that are really in need, who are in home, can't get out, they were already signed up. Maybe there were a few of them in the beginning of the year that signed up. But this indefinitely confined list, I am actually surprised that when those 2 county chairs were called on the carpet, that we didn't erase all those names from the system and say, sorry folks, you're going to have to vote by mail if you think you have COVID or you don't want to come in. They should have been removed. Their vote should have not counted. So anyway, I hope you do this forensic audit. I think it would be a good start, and it's computer runs. So all you do is give the requests to WEC, and hopefully on Monday you'll have some interesting numbers to take a look at to see, okay, how honest was this election? You know, we're looking at people who failed, their name, their birth date, and their identifying number, and then the registration list alerts are duplicates, deceased, and felon names. So let's see.
We have 1 more minute.
Okay, thank you for your time and allowing me to speak.
All right, let's go to Representative Stortwell. Very quickly, hopefully.
Okay, thank you. No, I just had one really brief question because, of course, a lot of the restrictions that were in place for the observers in Milwaukee, you know, were put in place arguably, you know, for COVID or whatever, even though, as you pointed out, Madison was not doing the same thing. So, and then you brought up the fact that even if you had a knee over the line or the toe over the line, they started harassing you. So I guess my question is, are you aware of how much more severe knee-transmitted COVID is?
I said to them, I don't think my knees are going to get COVID. I did say that to them.
All right, Representative Murphy.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Ma'am, I wanted to ask this question earlier, and maybe there were other people testifying that could answer this better than you, but I didn't always have an opportunity. And the question I want to ask is, there was an overvote in many districts, many precincts in Milwaukee, 200% of the people voting, sometimes more. Do you have a feel for, how this transpired?
Well, I can tell you this, it didn't happen on election day because the polls were not that busy at all.
Okay.
It happened during in-person absentee.
And maybe we'll have an opportunity that we'll have someone else that might be able to speak to that too.
The polls were not busy on election day.
Sure.
All right, very good. Thank you for your testimony. Next, we're going to talk to David Bolter. Before we go to David Bolter, while we clean up, Ledge Council looked into some of the requests that Representative Mocko and Representative Sortwell made, and they would like the floor. You just take it.
I'm going to go for a walkabout.
There you go.
So we were asked to give an additional opinion on whether the legislature has a role in selecting the presidential electors. And my colleague and I have consulted. We've also consulted with the attorneys at LRB, and we are all in agreement that under the current state statutes, there's no authority for the legislature to appoint the presidential electors. It's absolutely true that the U.S. Constitution does say that state legislatures have the authority to direct how presidential electors are appointed. And in Wisconsin, the way that the legislature has chosen to do that is to enact laws saying that the presidential electors will be selected. There will be a slate of electors chosen by each political party, and then the outcome of the popular vote will determine which slate of electors will serve and cast the electoral votes of Wisconsin.
All right. You may proceed.
Mr. Speaker, Madam Chairperson, committee members, I'm David Bolter. I am a retired 32-year Army colonel that have served this country both in regular Army and Army Reserve. I was also an Inspector General for the Army, and I've done obviously many things in the 32 years of service here and abroad. I was employed as one of the approximately 3,000 poll workers at the 2020 national election. In particular, I was assigned as a paid ballot counter. Thousands of ballots that came to the central count went through my hands. My entire period of work lasted 3 shifts. I got there at 5:30 the morning of the 3rd, and I stayed till approximately 1:45 the morning of the 4th. I assure you I will be brief. During the 3 shifts, I did characterize the entire environment as being dismissive in terms of asking questions, of getting challenges answered, getting objectives answered. I did see thousands of ballots that had the pre-printed 10-day residency requirement. I think that's what's already been discussed about statute 6.87 and also 6.15. Suffice to say, I saw a lot of red ink in there. And all the points that I'm making today, as I need to mention, has obviously been submitted in my notarized affidavit. When I objected to ballots with the red ink inserts and crossouts, I obviously gave my objection to the executive director, Ms. Woodall-Vogg, and was repeatedly ignored. I objected to what looked like countless occasions unconfirmed witness addresses on ballot envelopes. I saw their signature and I saw their address. Sometimes different ink, sometimes different handwriting all together. That's big. I saw many ballot envelopes that had no signature in the witness signature line, but the signature was obviously placed someplace else. When I did place the objections several times, Ms. Woodall-Vogg basically announced to the entire 4th floor that if there is a second signature anywhere on the envelope, that was considered admissible. Many of the ballot envelopes I received were already opened or unsealed on arrival. I stated my objections as well, which were basically cast aside. I'm guesstimating upwards of 15 to possibly upwards of 20% were in that state. I contend that the election observers were required to, as mentioned before by obviously Mr. Williams and other people here today, that they were up 15 to 20 feet away. A lot of them had binoculars. I don't think that really is the intent of the observer role that day, but that's where it was. They were all had the orange cones away from the pod tables, and there was no way that they could have 100% accurate proof of being able to do their job, period. At approximately 1 in the morning, an announcement was made that a truck or trucks full of ballots were arriving shortly. While I did not physically witness the arrival of the trucks, this activity was similar, as we've heard in days to follow, systematic fraud claims in other states. In summary, the idea of systematic corruption is still a matter of debate. It's not yet factual in the sense of an established illegality. That can only happen in a criminal court. But for the sake of the Republic, the ideas of the nation which I fought for 3 decades, both here and abroad, and the voice of the American people to elect their leaders, I hope it does. That concludes my presentation, subject to questions.
Very good. Well, first, thank you for your service to our country. Second, do we have any other questions? All right. See no other questions? Thank you for your service. All right, next we're going to hear from Cindy Boble. All right, are you ready?
Sure.
All right, go ahead when you're ready.
As he stated, my name is Cindy Babel. It's pronounced many ways. First off, I want to give you a little background. I am retired. For over 40 years, I worked in the commercial insurance industry and was trained and employed to analyze, assess, and view information. So I thought it would be very helpful for me, as someone that has looked at information and analyzed information my whole life, evaluating risk and exposure, putting up millions of dollars, to honor my state and observe. I did forward, I don't know if it was passed out, a list of where I was and the hours I put in.
Eat them.
I would think the Election Commission would be interested in what I saw, since I put in over 50 hours. I was at absentee voting, otherwise known from the website as voting by absentee ballot, at 6 locations, 8 different times, totaling about 27 hours. Those include City of Milwaukee, Racine, and Waukesha. On election day, I spent over 9 hours in Wauwatosa at City Hall, where there was 2 polling places and central count. On the recount, I spent over 15 hours observing in the city of Milwaukee. So I have a broad perspective of the things that happened. I did not previously do any poll watching or observing, but I did do the training multiple times, in person and online. And being in the commercial insurance industry, which is probably just slightly below the legal industry as far as details and procedures, I felt pretty confident. After the first 2 or 3 places that I was at, I was astounded that every single location in this proceeded did everything differently. I've heard many elected officials say, well, it's all the same at all the locations. You have a paper ballot and you can just count them. It is extremely different at every location I was at, excluding recount, which is a different situation. And I can go through. During absentee voting, City of Milwaukee Cannon Park Pavilion used electronic, or some people refer to them as skinny ballots, I think. Waukesha used paper ballots. Zablasky Library, I hope I'm not slaughtering that name, used electronic or skinny ballots. This is all pre-election day. Festival Hall in Racine, paper ballots. Bayview Library on Kinnickinnick, electronic skinny ballots. Festival Hall again, paper, and Broadway, City Hall in Milwaukee, electronic skinny ballots. Every single place did registration, ballots, signatures, gluing the envelopes differently. Some places they used Elmer's glue to glue the envelopes. Some of us can remember back to our childhood. I like the smell of glue. I remember Elmer's glue can very easily be opened. And since I was at Central Count, nobody opened the envelopes via the glue flap. They were all slid open. And they were slid open very fast. So if anything had been adjusted, I'm not saying it was, but no one would ever see it. The other thing I found very interesting is when I've asked about procedures that weren't being followed, such as using the ineligible voter log, announcing name and address, verifying proof of residence. A lot of these things were loose, to be kind. When I would bring something to the attention of someone pre-election day, I was told, mainly in the city of Milwaukee and Racine, and I'm going to quote, and it was almost verbatim per word at each location. Mind you, that's 6 different locations, 6 different days, 6 different times. Let me get my quote correctly. We do not have to follow those procedures now. That is only done on election day. I said, well, I looked at my guidelines, and it says they're supposed to announce their name and address, and you're supposed to look at the ineligible log. They told me they did not have to. I looked up the statute, which I'm very familiar with, being an ex-workers' compensation underwriter who deals with the statute of the state for workers' compensation frequently. And if you are ever tired, you can read statutes, and that puts you right to sleep, especially insurance ones. So I pulled out the exact statute area, which was section 6.79, subchapter 2A, which said you had to announce your name and address. She said she would call the officials in the city of Milwaukee and confirm. She never got back to me on that. I then asked her, this is in Kinnickinnick at Bayview Library. I then said, no one is checking ineligible voter log. She said, we don't have to. Again, the verbatim, we only do that on election day. She did, to her credit, Louisa, the chief inspector, did check with the voter election people in the city of Milwaukee. She came back to me and told me, again, quote, they forgot to bring me the ineligible log. Now, remind you, I was there on October 29th. That was a long time after they'd been processing votes without the log. I did stay there 2 to 3 more hours. They were supposedly bringing the log. It never appeared. I never went back to that location. So what happened after that, I have no idea. The other things I saw, I will generalize for you. Proof of residence was very loosely used. In fact, in Wauwatosa on election day, there were 2 polling stations in the library there. They were not using correct proof of residence information. I caught them a lot of times using, and I blacked out my name, Geico, State Farm. If you ever get a mortgage or a student loan or a credit card, they will snail mail you all kinds of offers for insurance with your name and address. That was used frequently. I brought this to the chief's attention, and he said they're not supposed to use it. Are they using it? And I said yes. He walked over there. The gentleman didn't know what was supposed to be used and what wasn't. I gave him my cheat sheet out of my packet of information to use for the rest of the day. I can't tell you if the training was bad or if it was on purpose. It's probably, like earlier said this morning, both. I was very disheartened of what happened and very disappointed. I challenge you as the Election Commission to be the eyes and ears like I was. That's what we did in my industry. We would secret shop, basically, what was happening. It was very intimidating and threatening and bullying. Racine was the worst. This was in Festival Hall. I have affidavits that was also handed out that you can look at if you wish, that I've done and notarized. And I drew a picture and I used their website, Festival Hall's website. The interesting thing was they put us in a corner. This is a 15,700 square foot building, so there's plenty of room. I wanted to get closer so I could see. So depending on what I was looking at, I was anywhere from 20 to 50 feet away from everything. They finally let me go a little bit closer to the registration table. I can only see 1 of 4. I was trying to hear and listen, and I must have accidentally, they had tape, put part of my foot over the taped line. Okay, I wasn't paying attention to my foot. It was part of my foot. The clerk came, well, actually the assistant clerk, sorry, came and started yelling at me in my face. And I told her I was trying to listen, and I saw them not using the ineligible voter log. She said, yes, they were. And I said, I hate to bicker with you, but they weren't. Their purse and their phone have been on top of that log for the last 2 hours, and their purse and phone hasn't moved. So I don't know how those last 3 people got checked. She then proceeded to get in my face and wanted to know if I was threatening her, and she was going to get the city clerk. I said, by all means, go get the city clerk. She came back with the log that I have to sign and wanted me to print my name so it's more legible. I said, sure, fine, I'll print it. Why do you want me to print it, I asked. She goes, we are going to call ahead to all the other polling locations, and if you show up there, you will be kicked out. I don't know if you saw me sit down. I'm only 5 foot tall. Maybe in my prime I could have tackled somebody, but probably not now. The other interesting thing about Racine, which doesn't come up a lot, Green Bay, Milwaukee, Madison comes up a lot. The interesting thing about Racine, I was there twice, and appropriately so once on Halloween. They had moved the whole city hall of Racine down to this festival hall, curtained it off. And there was another observer with me kind of asking the city clerk, Tara, not sure how she pronounces it, why they moved the whole city hall down there. And I said, perchance, is your city hall under construction? Because I was just at Waukesha a few days ago. It's under construction. It's kind of a mess. No, it's not under construction. It's just easier for us to have city hall down here while we're doing the early voting. I said, so if I needed a dog license or a building permit or pay my taxes or my fine, I would have to come down here. She said yes. I was there, you can total up the hours, 2 different days. I kind of got lost in the parking lot, so I did circle the building. There was no signage for City Hall affairs whatsoever at any doors or in the parking lot, and I never saw one person go back there and do any city business. I also was not allowed to use the restroom, which would have been behind that curtain. I was told to go find another place to go to the bathroom somewhere in the city. Yes. Because they didn't want me to go back there and see. I was also made to sit at Cannon Park on the 24th and 25th for several hours. I was there from 10 to 4 the first day in front of an open door at 34 degrees the whole day. The second day they made me sit in the same spot. The second day, just for fun, I saw the first day that at the end of the day they brought out this bag that kind of looked like a pizza delivery bag. You've heard that term. Red, some were red, some were blue. Took all the ballots out. 2 people took them out, put them in this bag. They had the key. They went to a room that we could not see or hear and did something with them. The first day, they brought 3 ballot envelopes out and had the inspector general, or chief, they call him, write something on them and took them back. So the second day, I left at 4 o'clock, and I thought, I wonder what they do with those at night. They're not going to leave them in this park pavilion all night long. So I got in my car and went around the block and parked somewhere else where I could see what happened. They brought them out in the bag, and one of the poll workers had the ballots, not the chief, Tony, is their name with an I believe. And he threw them in the back of his SUV and off they went. The chief didn't even take them with her. They went with a poll worker. Where they went, I have no idea. The recount you've heard a lot about. It was very intimidating. It was very bullying. I was told on the first Saturday I was there, since I'm short and a little elderly, have back problems, I could turn my chair around and kind of lean on the chair, in the back of the chair, and watch. 2 days later, I was told I was not allowed to do that. They called the cops and hauled me out. So I think because Tony recognized me the day before, because I was at the table next to her, and wanted me out of there. Look at my notes quickly. There's a lot I could go over with you in the essence of time, and you're all probably getting tired. If you'd like me to come back and speak further with all my experience at all the different locations, I'd be happy to. I just encourage you that we could put more laws on the books, but they're not following the laws that we have now.
All right, thank you. Our first question comes from Senator Bernier.
You know, clearly, you know, I've trained poll workers, chief inspectors, municipal clerks, poll watchers, and I know there's this instinct or this thought as a poll worker that the poll watcher is somehow there to catch you doing something wrong, and they're adverse to it. And I know we have to get over this issue of the poll watcher is there just to make sure the process is followed, sometimes there to keep an eye on how many people showed up to vote. And if, Kathy Bernier did not come in by 5 o'clock on election day to vote, then you all are going to call me and say, do you need a ride to the polls or whatever? I don't think a lot of people understand that poll watchers are not necessarily there to catch someone doing something wrong. And we shouldn't have the idea, the poll workers should not, or the municipal clerks or the chief inspectors, that somehow you're there to catch them doing something wrong, and to not be adverse or defensive when the poll watcher does point out something. So that's lack of confidence, in my opinion, and lack of training, that they're having to swallow their pride and say, okay, she's right, this is what we're supposed to be doing, and do it right from then on. So with that said, you have very specific times, specific places, and specific issues. Would you be adverse to sitting down in a room with some of these people and sit and talk about your experience and what it is that we can do see, poll watchers are a part of our electoral process. Poll watchers are as legitimately in the polling place as what the poll workers are and the chief inspectors. And I think we've got to get that message across through legislation and or through the Wisconsin Election Commission and the county clerks and the municipal clerks, that the poll workers need to recognize that you, the poll watcher, are just as important as they are to the electoral process. And so, I'm hoping that we can get back to you, find out if some of these election officials would like to sit down and have a conversation about how you were treated and why you were treated that way. Now, that might be visions of grandeur, but it is the holiday season, and I'm optimistic that we can get over this issue some way, shape, or form. And so make sure that, I don't know, do we have your name, your address, your phone number, whatever?
Yeah. Ron and William have it.
Okay, and that we can get back to you, because I would love to facilitate an honest-to-goodness discussion, a respectful discussion.
Right, and I agree with you that I don't know what was said to the poll workers, but during their training, just to identify that watchers will be in, and they're going to be watching, and they're not there to cause a problem or to accuse people. Just a simple explanation and some basic training of what we're there for and why would probably be very helpful.
We have time for one last question. Representative Mako.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And maybe it's not necessarily directed at the witness, but I'm increasingly getting frustrated and wondering what we can actually do. I just want to scream as we look at all of this nonsense. And there's a short-term problem and a long-term problem. The short-term problem is this current election, and I feel virtually helpless. The longer-term one, if any of this legislation requires the governor's signature, again, I think we're at a loss. I've got no less, as you are doing, Senator Bernier. I'm making a list, and I'm up to 15 different pieces of legislation already, and it's disgusting to me. I'm also vice chair of the audit committee. I'm wondering if that helps. I'm just looking, is there any value in us talking to the joint chairs of that committee and doing a full-blown audit? Again, doesn't help us today, doesn't help us in the next few weeks, but I'm increasingly frustrated at hearing testimony from this witness and all of these witnesses who I find profoundly credible, to take their time to come down here and put up with this. And I'm just frustrated as a representative. I certainly, like many of you, are doing this job because out of the stewardship sense of responsibility that I have. People say, you must have always wanted to do this. I go, no, I don't even know I need to do it now. I'd much rather be sitting down in Florida. But but I feel responsibility that we've got to get up here and do things. And I think it's quality business people and everybody in this room that is lending that credibility. And so, again, I hope that we get some guidance and I apologize, sir. I know I'm not asking a question, but I'm sitting here getting more frustrated by the minute, the more of this stuff that I hear, wondering, well, what can we do? And so, again, going forward, obviously it'll be legislation. I hope you guys, whatever you put together, I'll sponsor that. And then the second thing is, can we do an audit? What do we do moving forward? So that's just the profound frustration that I'm having over here.
Very good. Since that was a little bit more based on things not necessarily connected to this particular person providing testimony, I'll give you an extra minute. Representative Murphy had a question.
So from all the testimony that we've received, it seems like there's an unprecedented level of bullying going on in these polling places. Now, you're a new poll observer. You haven't done this before.
Not in previous years.
And to me, this is where part of the issue comes in. I believe we had a lot of new poll workers this year and a lot of new poll observers. And to me, it seems as if some of the people working in the polls have taken advantage of the inexperience of their workers and the people observing them. And I think, when you shine a light on the cockroaches, they scurry. Mm-hmm. And this is where we hear so many things about, well, this was done in this corner, and this was done behind this group of people. It's not transparent. It's not. And Representative Mako, you said that you were very frustrated and didn't know what to do. But I'm here to say right now that I would be more than willing to look at a vote to decertify the group of electors that we have right now. Thank you.
May I add a couple things that I kind of forgot?
Just do it.
There's, in the essence of time and everything, I have a lot more that I could tell you about, that be it someone that was held to great account in my work environment, is responsible for multi-million dollars. I have a lot that, in my viewpoint, would startle you. The things that I could go into in detail, which I won't hear for the essence of time. I'd be more than willing to do that. I did 3 notarized affidavits. I probably could have done 10.
Cindy, why don't you provide those to my office and I'll bring it to...
I have the 3 that I have provided. You have them.
Very good. All right. Thank you very much. Let's go on. We have 5 more people to testify yet today. Rick Boss is our next, appearing via Zoom.
I've lost the light today. Anyway, thanks for having me here. I have the privilege of being the vice chair of the vaunted Milwaukee County Election Commission. And first of all, I want to say that of all these complaints that I've heard here today, I didn't hear them at the actual recount. That would have been a good thing to do, seeing I was there the entire time. I do thank you for having me here. I assume it's because I'm on the commission, but it should be more importantly that I'm here because I'm a citizen. I'm going to give you a little bit of the background on why this is important to me. My parents, like a lot of other people back in the 60s, were involved in civil rights. They met on a picket line while they were working against education discrimination. They also worked against Wisconsin's unfair housing. And most importantly, as it relates to this conversation, they worked to preserve what we as Americans and Wisconsinites need to make sure that the Republic works, is to protect our votes. I remember as a small child going with my mother into the voting booth. I remember being taught that the vote wasn't a right, it was a sacred privilege and a responsibility that needed to be exercised. And it was those type of things that were in the forefront of my mind in September when I was asked to comment on not a Supreme Court, but a circuit court decision came down, affirming that we would use Wisconsin law to run our elections. And I remember thinking that during all the COVID and the pandemic, how important it was that that was going to be the case, because everybody wants to understand that the election is going to be done fairly and it's going to be done by law, instead of like so many things during this pandemic where it's an ad hoc reactionary out of, apprehension, fear, whatever it is. It's not the time when you're scared and when you're under fire to create new systems. And for whatever reason, as a nation, we allowed this to take place. And for whatever reason, the state of Wisconsin, through administrative auspices, allowed this to take place. The circuit court made the right decision. They did it because it was the positive thing to do for the state of Wisconsin. It was very democratic. It was a victory for the rule of law, and it was how people need to see things work. But a lot of things have changed since September. The systemic racism made evidence by food trucks showing up with New York license plates. I saw them going around giving out food primarily in minority areas, sponsored by billionaires from outside the state. The implication is that people in those areas somehow need some kind of incentive to exercise their American birthright. To me, it's the softest kind of annoying bigotry of low expectations. And it should be repugnant to everybody, regardless of party. And it is clearly voter manipulation. There are a lot of things that have been said here, and for the good of the order, I'm not going to repeat a bunch of them. But the practice of ballot harvesting, basically, this needs to end because it implies that people are too busy to exercise their hard-fought and hard-won franchise to show up on time and in person to actually vote. These things would make our forefathers and our founding fathers nuts. And I know people who were part of the civil rights leadership back in the 60s, and both groups would be absolutely appalled at the laziness by which we approach elections. We owe it to ourselves and the next generation to make this fundamental step in the republic, voting, safe. We owe it to everybody to make it count. The outcome of the election and the outcome of the recounts, I'm going to pause there for a moment. A lot of people expect a lot of things out of a recount. I need to make sure that people understand that the poison is in the pill already by the time it gets to the Milwaukee County Election Commission. If there is voter manipulation with food trucks, that already happened beforehand. If there is mass production of ballots, that happened before it showed up. Those things need to be systemically moved out of the way before there's a recount, because a recount is just going to do that. It's going to recount whatever mess is put in there. But when we do have a recount, all materials need to be available. We have partisan commissions, and we're going to have split votes. Most people expect that there's signature matching in Wisconsin, and there's not. That's something this body can address. Citizens should be allowed to inspect the entire process. They need to be able to see what is going on. Because after all, the vote that we're trying to protect, the vote that we're trying to confirm, is the collective decision of us as a family. And it is what allows us as a republic to go forward. And it is what makes our government legitimate. And if any portion of our vote is tampered with through systemic or individual fraud or neglect or misrepresentation or overreach by administrative authorities, we all suffer. When fraud is found, I hear on the media all the time, they talk about there's no evidence of fraud. I remember in the 2016 recount, as a bipartisan commission, we referred some information to the DA for action, and the DA's response was, I have real criminals to go pursue. So it's kind of a self-fulfilling prophecy that the media pretends that there's no evidence, but when you can't get a DA to pursue something that is taking away the freedom and franchise from so many people because there's real criminals, there is gaming of the system, there is fraud. And until the DAs step up and do things to make sure that those people are prosecuted, we're not going to get anywhere. If the election and the recount highlight the administrative guidance that somehow becomes super strong, it supersedes the statutes, Excuse me, I've been waiting for 7 hours to testify. Now I'm all tongue-tied. Anyway, administrative guidance can't supersede statute. That is the sum and substance of what's going on here. Administrative guidance kept people off the ballot that should have been on. All the time when I hear different cases to decide who's going to be on a ballot or whatever, voter intent is always what's used as somehow the super glue to get things stuck to whatever anybody wants. But voter intent obviously would have allowed the Green Party to be on the ballot, but it wasn't. So this administrative guidance and oversight needs to be brought back into check, and that's something that the body can do. A lot of people want to know all the boogeymen that I saw during the election. Did I see ballots that weren't safeguarded and didn't have initials? Absolutely. Did I witness thousands of cured ballots? Absolutely. As a matter of fact, I went through a great deal of effort to make sure that they were siloed off so that they were easily counted, along with the indefinitely confined. Did I witness thousands of ballots being siloed off because they were cured? Yes. And so did anybody else who wanted to tune in, because despite everyone's complaining about how it happened in Milwaukee, and it was different than Madison, at least it was on television and you could see it and make note if anybody cared to watch, because often our democracy goes unseen because it's a little boring and drying to some. To me, it's fascinating, and it connects us all the way back to the Plains of Marathon, when a free people decided that they would not be subject. We owe it to ourselves to continue that tradition. Too many people have fought and died for it. Do we have ballots that were cast by people who claim to be indefinitely confined, who clearly weren't indefinitely confined? I absolutely believe that. I do believe it was to get around the photo ID. And does that cause people to have less confidence in their election? Absolutely. Because the people of Wisconsin voted to have photo ID. And there should be no excuse for getting around it. Every generation is called upon to do what is necessary to defend the republic. Right now, the simple ability to vote and have one person, one vote be the order of the day is now that battle. No one of my generation would have thought that simply casting a vote would become such a difficult task. Should we do things to make it easier? Wisconsin and our motto with forward, should we have a holiday? I'm okay with having a holiday. I want to take away that excuse. Do we need to cure ballots? The statute allows for there to be a correction. It doesn't require an administrative oversight to do that. Should a recount have access to applications? Absolutely. You've heard all these things. That's why I'm kind of going through them a little bit fast. But there are a number of things that are on the books that are not followed. There are a number of things that should be on the books, like signature matching, that you guys can address. I'm going to sound like I'm being harsh, but I don't intend to be harsh, because everything should be civil. But I remember my history books teaching me that Valley Forge was probably not a pleasant place. So when you're going in to defend democracy as an observer and somebody's a little rude to you, let's all cowboy up. Because if you think they're not rude to the only Republican who walks into the Milwaukee County Courthouse, it's time to cowboy up. We need to stick together. We need to remember who we are. We need to be the type of people our parents and grandparents would be proud of. We can't control them, but we can control us. So I've cut a lot out because a lot has been said. If you have any questions, I'll be more than happy to take them.
Rick, thank you for your patience waiting to testify today. I really greatly appreciate that. I know you had to wait a long time, and that's excellent. We have a question from Representative Sortwell.
Thank you for your testimony, sir, and I appreciate the final comment that you happened to make about, we need to make sure we're doing our jobs even when there are people trying to assault our democratic process, which is absolutely what's happening when they're treating observers that way. But specifically, actually, you mentioned that the counting and everything was online, and I was wondering, because I requested the recording from the online count for Central Count in Green Bay, and they already don't have that video anymore, surprisingly enough. They don't have the video anymore of the counting process. So I'm wondering if Milwaukee still has theirs. Do you know?
I do not know, but I do know I made an effort to reach out to the attorneys to see if they were going to request it for discovery. And I didn't follow up because they're making $500 an hour, whatever they're making. I don't care at that level. So I'm hoping that they did that. And so maybe if necessary, I can reach out for you, or if you have contacts, we can reach out and see if they have that.
Yeah, I would appreciate that, because it's troubling when municipalities get rid of records.
Absolutely, I will reach out.
All right, next is Senator Darling.
Thank you very much. Good to see you, and thank you for your passion. My question goes back to the same thing I've sort of been pounding all day, is I'm very concerned about the lack of compliance with state statutes. In some cases, it's a felony. In other cases, it's a misdemeanor. There has to be some consequence for this. And I look at the Wisconsin Elections Commission, when they are in defiance of our statutes, that really, really concerns me. And there has to be penalties, because to all these issues we've talked about today, it's not the first time we've heard about the issue of the lists not being updated, and the lists have to be updated. That's one of the things we have in statutes. The attorney generals and but the legislature arguing about whose responsibility is it. Well, it's the Wisconsin Elections Commission who should make sure that those lists are updated, because that's the beginning. The signatures, all the other abuses we've heard about. You only can have fraud when you don't have compliance with the law. And some people choose to do that individually, but what we see here is a systemic non-compliance, even by our Wisconsin Election Commission. And this is unacceptable. We have to get control of this. And I understand your frustration to the point you're saying, well, we shouldn't certify. I mean, that's a frustration I think many of us are feeling. But this is unacceptable, and has been unacceptable for a while, and I don't know what we can do about it for this election, and I don't want to push it off to the next, but this is totally unacceptable. And I want to know from you, Rick, what do you think we should do as a consequence?
Are you saying relative to certification, or
no, the whole non-compliance with state statutes when it comes to election law?
Well, I would suggest, and this is just off the top of my head, I would suggest scrapping every aspect of WEC, reconstituting it. Do not set it up so that the administrative staff wins by default if there's not a 4-2 vote. Getting rid of any bylaws that came from GAB into WEC to whatever the new body would be. And I'm not casting any aspersions on anybody who's staff. I know that the staff that I work with in Milwaukee County are serious and earnest about their jobs. They have their points of view, but they're decent people. They see it differently. So I'm not casting any aspersions on those people. And I go to polls and I watch these people work earnestly, but I also see the law applied inconsistently. Here's the insidious problem as I see it. There have been so many tweaks, and the statutes say may this and could this and voter intent that, and that's taken on this whole life of its own. And then as we've gotten lazy, because to me, when you're trying to not vote in person just because it's convenient, that's lazy. Once we've gotten away from having a family conversation once every 4 years for president and showing up and casting a simple vote, the systems that we use in Milwaukee County would make that information. We have an archived paper ballot, we have an image of it, and we have the tally sheets. If everyone was primarily voting in person, we would have a lot more confidence in Milwaukee. I can't talk about Dominion or anywhere else in the state. We would have a lot more confidence in our election, and we would have the results in a timely manner. So you don't see these spikes at 3 o'clock in the morning that everybody wants me to explain while I was sleeping. And yes, it was central count most likely, okay? There's not always a boogeyman, but the problems are so rolled into, it's okay to do red ink. It's okay to fix the address. It's okay to do this, when in fact it's not. The state legislature, in my opinion, needs to put its foot down, add a couple of sentences that says you will not correct, whatever it takes. You've got a whole bunch of folks that sleep underneath the Capitol that come up with how the words need to be. But everybody on their face understands what needs to happen. It needs to be one person, one vote. That's it. We need to stop trying to find ways to allow people to sneak in the back door. We need to purge our voting rolls. And I know we're not supposed to say purge. Clean them up. Every election, I get people's mail at my house, only during elections, who have not lived at my house in 20 years. And I guarantee it happens all across the state. I see traffic in places that don't normally have traffic because I hear rumors that they're in there, making up ballots. I don't get into any of that until I see it. Because I know for a fact if we just adhere to the laws that we have now, we can safeguard our election. The Green Party's on the ballot, those people aren't offended. You don't go around curing ballots, then the people who followed the rules don't have to be offended because their vote counted. If somebody professed to be indefinitely confined when they're not, then they stole the ability for somebody else. Play by the rules. And administrative agencies do not trump the elected deliberative body that the people of Wisconsin have put in place. And if you want the extra 2 cents, of course, I'm partisan. I think we should go ahead and appoint our own electors.
All right.
Hey, I'm boring.
All right, I don't see any other questions. Thank you. I really appreciate you waiting. I know it's been a long day, and you've been in the queue for a long time. Our next witness is going to be Lisa Van Wyck. You can go ahead when you're ready.
First, thank you for having me.
Turn your microphone.
Thank you. First, thank you for having me. I actually just found out late last night that I was asked to come today, so I hope that what I share with you today helps you in this process. My name is Lisa Van Wyck, and I participated in the Milwaukee recount on Friday, November 20th, and Saturday, November 21st. And I'm going to give you a little bit of my background so you understand in context who I am and why I chose to do so. I was actually born in Pompano Beach, Florida, Fort Lauderdale, Florida, and moved up to Wisconsin when I was 19 years old. And that was probably the best thing that ever happened to me. I grew up in Pompano Beach, went to a small Christian school, and came from a very poor background and humble means. My mother was born in Haiti, and she, in her story, my father was born in Puerto Rico. They met in New York, but before that, she actually moved to New York looking for a better life. She went from dancing, being popular, dancing professionally in Haiti, to sleeping on kitchen floors to make a better life, actually, for herself here. And over the years, she would send back little bits of money to bring the rest of her family here to the States. When I came here, I had gone through a lot of trauma during my time in Florida. So the state of Wisconsin really, truly, I feel like, is my home. I love it. And there are wonderful people here. And over time, I had graduated moved from Miami, Florida, graduated from University of Wisconsin, Oshkosh, graduated with a now master's degree in microbiology, with a BS in biology and chemistry. I taught high school biology and chemistry at Appleton, in the Appleton area school district at Appleton North High School before I had children and got married. And then when they were toddlers, I actually started working for my husband in the construction industry, and for 10 years I actually became the chief information officer and dealt with the technology there for his company. When then I founded Inspire 365 LLC, which is now named Blaze Sports and Fitness, and I have run that company from scratch, from the ground up, for the last 8 years. And Blaze gives back to the community. We train champions for life is our mission. We work with youth through professional athletes, helping them be their best and doing everything we can to help them to find their way in life and lead a better life. And I just have to tell you, this year has been, best word for it is probably atrocious. I think that we have issues with our leadership. There have been decisions that have been made this year that have shattered people's lives, There are still, I work with youth and I work with adults who are still confined to their homes. There's 15,000 youth in the community of Appleton alone that have not touched their hallways of their schools. There are people in my office daily who cry, who are dealing with bullying, with the issues that they are dealing with their homes. And yet, just today, I got a text saying that there was a decision made at UW-Madison saying that those students, if they go back to school, if they don't test twice a week and show and put it in an app, they will be suspended. So, as John Maxwell, the father of leadership, says, we are leadership sad right now. And it's making me mad because there are too many representatives, too many people wanting to be right than do right. And I just want to let you know that for me, it's not about being a Republican or a Democrat. It's about doing the right thing. So when I saw a lot of decisions happening this year that were hurting people, and when I saw a lot of words being said about fraud that was taking place, even in our state, I knew that after the election, I had to go to Milwaukee and participate and see for myself what truly was happening. And I feel like for today, I'm coming as we the people. It's not for a party. It's about being a voice for the people who are being suppressed. We are here to make sure that there is integrity in this process and that the laws are being followed. Because if there is no integrity in the process and the laws are broken, it is an illegitimate event. It is farce. It is a farce and it is a fake event. And when we can't trust our system and we can't trust the people and our so-called democratically elected officials or the people who are running these events, we are no better than countries ruled by dictators, where a small group of people have all the power and we have no right and we have no voice. There was a gentleman by the name of Dean Knudsen who spoke earlier today, and I was appalled that he just came out and said, there's no fraud. Let's put a little pause on that for a second, because we throw that word around all the time, but what does it actually mean? Webster said it. It's wrongful or criminal deception intended to result in financial or personal gain. It's wrong or criminal deception. The wrong happens before the crime is proven in court. So I'm tired of hearing that there is no fraud. It's clear, sitting here today, listening to all of these people, honest citizens giving their testimonies, that they were wronged. Secondly, he said, the laws weren't changed, but we know that rules were implemented that superseded the laws. Why have laws if we don't follow them? Thirdly, he also said that there's 0 sworn complaints that were filed to the Wisconsin Election Commission. So this is new for me. I come in to do a job, to be a poll observer, recount observer. I don't know all the rules. I did go through the training. And I was appalled at what I experienced, which I'll explain in a second. But to say that, oh, there's 0, I didn't know that there's a place to actually place my complaint. I think you've seen it. There's a lot here that can be learned. There's a lot that can be taught. When I went to the Milwaukee recount, from what I experienced, I believe that was illegitimate. It was unlawful for 3 reasons. I was blinded, bullied, and shackled by big city ballots. And I'm going to say that again. And I think you've already seen from what people have said, but we were blinded as observers. We were bullied, and we were shackled by we as a group, as a state, all of our counties are shackled by what happened in these big cities, and that is wrong. So I was an observer Friday evening, and on Saturday, I'm going to tell you a little bit more about Saturday. I actually sat in front of the Wauwatosa tables. And as you know, and from what other people have said, there's 2 tables, and I'll call them a station. And Wisconsin state statutes, and I'm learning more about the statutes, and I find it absolutely amazing, and I applaud you for all that you do, and I thank you for all that you do. When I see in state statute 9.011B11, it says that the ballots and materials must be available for candidates and their representatives to view and offer any objections to a ballot being counted. That they should be made, the election materials should be made available for us to view and object to, and they were not. They were absolutely not. There is no way that we were able to see from 6 to 8 feet away, and I was looking at envelopes. We couldn't see names. We couldn't see stickers or tags. We couldn't see what they were labeled as. So there was no oversight. Absolutely no oversight. So if you want, as a committee, want to know that what happened during the recount was valid, you know it isn't. It isn't. And I was trying to do my job, and I would just get up and lean over to try and get anywhere near the plexiglass, because you couldn't see through the plexiglass. It's actually scratched. You can't read anything. And I had a woman sitting next to me who was obviously for the Biden campaign. She wasn't even looking at the table or the ballots. All she did was continue to bully, mock. When every time I stood up to just lean over, she's like, "You can't stand. You can't stand. That's wrong. I'm going to call an official and have you kicked out." And I'm like, I'm not standing. I'm leaning over. I'm just trying to see. I'm just trying to do my duty and do what I was asked to do. And she kept complaining, and she called an official over. And I said, how am I supposed to see? And nothing was rectified. And then I would pull out my phone, and I tried to use a magnifying app just to get a little closer. That did not work. And then she would say, "Oh my gosh, she's taking pictures. She's taking pictures. You need to kick her out." And she grabbed another official over. And he actually walked away after because I explained to him and I showed him, I'm not taking pictures. I'm just trying to see. And so this went on for 75 minutes straight. 75 minutes. And I finally went to the bathroom. And as I went to the bathroom, I saw a woman standing in the hallway surrounded by 5 to 6 police officers. And I'm like, oh, this doesn't look good. She's by herself, and it looks very intimidating. So I walked up to her, and I just stood there, and I tried to listen to see what was going on. And I heard her explain the story and tell the police officers what happened. And I don't know what the debate or the argument was, but supposedly there was a Democratic election official who she was arguing with, and he happened to take her jacket because he wanted her to leave. He took her jacket and threw it across the aisle. And she went up to him and put her finger on his nose and said, "That's not right. Don't touch my stuff." And the police officers told her, well, because he's the person in charge, we have to listen to him, and he wants you to leave. You're being kicked out. And she said, that's not right. And we should not be treated like this. And you can tell she was very upset. Her eyes were red, and she was completely disillusioned and disenfranchised with the situation that she was being kicked out and being treated like this. And in another instance on Saturday, I walked by what I call a big city table. There was a gentleman who was standing back away from the chair, and he was a Republican observer. And I just walked in and was like, how are you doing? Like, you know, what's going on at your table? And he said, I can't see anything. He said that there's 4 people behind the table, and there's one of me. How am I supposed to observe and validate or make sure anything's right when it's 1 person to 4? And in addition, they were going through these were ballots at that table, really quick. Every second they were flipping them over. He can't see, and he couldn't do anything or say anything. We started walking out to the main hallway together, and he continued to tell me the story about why he was here. And he said that his son, who's in college, there's 13 of them, and they're out of state. They had to send in their absentee ballots, and he said 12. There's one of them was voted independent, and 12 of them voted for Trump. And he's like, make sure you check that your ballots or your votes were recorded, that they were received. All 12 of them were not received. Every single one of them did not count because somebody said, even though they mailed them in, that they don't. Why is that? Why? I also went back to the Wauwatosa table, trying to do the same thing, feeling like I was getting absolutely nowhere. For you, for our state, for our citizens. And I got up to go to the bathroom again and came across the Milwaukee table, and there was a woman there, and I saw the county clerk, city clerk, county clerk George Christensen, standing over a woman who's sitting down, and she's got her hands up like this saying, I just can't see. I cannot see. And he's like, sorry, you just need to get better training. Your Republican officials, they're not training you good enough. He was very demeaning. She was upset. She wasn't saying anything loudly. She was just saying, how am I supposed to do my job? And he just dismissed her and walked away. And this is on video somewhere. There's like 3 people who took videos of this interaction, this discourse. She ended up getting up and leaving. So I sat down there to see for myself what was happening at that table. And all I saw were people like this. They didn't care. They just wanted to get out of there. Friday night, when things were shut down early because there was confusion and there was debates about what should be counted and what the pile should be, the people behind the poll workers were complained. They're like, are you serious? I might have to come back and work on the weekend? Am I going to have to work on Thanksgiving? Well, I'm like, I'll be here. This is important. And that evening, and also on Saturday, there's going to be 2 more things that I want to say. There's a couple things that happened. I just I don't know what the laws are, and I just want to share with you because I want to know from you. So on Friday, when the poll observers were asking the poll workers and a clerk that was walking around, where are the applications? Because those were one of the things that we, as observers, were told to object to if there were no applications with ballots. She said, well, I don't have them. They're in my car. They're too heavy. If somebody could help bring them in, sure. And on Saturday, I was walking alongside somebody else who were just wheeling in a little cart, the envelopes and ballots, and I could hear the gentleman say, why is there no police escort for this? I can't even believe this. These materials are important because they represent the will of the people. And when our rules or the people who are in power of enforcing the rules aren't run properly, it's why I feel like I can say this whole thing is a sham. And I would hate to say that because my state of Wisconsin and my country, the United States of America, I absolutely love, and I think that we have so many good things here. But when we allow this, it hurts a lot of families and it hurts a lot of people. So I implore you, I implore this committee to please listen and act. Please listen, but also act. I listened to the testimony of Phil Klein, Bart Williams, Mike Dreyer. There's a lot of smart people that come through. And I'm asking for, we the people are asking for more of an investigation to be done. Bring in the military, have them go through the ballots. I'm sure they do it really fast, really cleanly, and really well. Invalidate those big city ballots if that's what we have to do. And increase the oversight and the quality of our election process. Thank you.
Very good. Any questions? All right. Seeing none, thank you for waiting so patiently today, and thank you for your testimony. We have 3 more people left. We've got Bill Schneider. So, hey, Bill, let them just finish sanitizing your station before you get to it, and then it's all yours.
Hello, I'm Bill Schneider from Mount Calvary, Wisconsin. My dad is in a nursing home, and he's got dementia very bad. I don't know if you've ever been in a nursing home, but 50% of the people, if not more, are lined up against the wall, and they just sit there all day long. So I was checking my vote online to see if I voted, and I said, just for the heck of it, I'm going to check if my dad voted. My dad voted absentee at the nursing home, and there is no way in this world he even knew what he was looking at, if he could even mark the ballot itself. So that tells me that there's 45 people in the nursing home, and the manager of the nursing home is in charge of getting the absentee ballots. Well, I think there's a lot of shenanigans going on in all the nursing homes across the state, and my dad's vote was stolen. I know it. We've talked about, I've watched people all day that there's no evidence, but there's evidence that my dad's vote was stolen from him. And I only got a minute to talk. That's all I got to tell you. And I drove almost 80 miles. Something needs to be done about this election. You guys got to step in. We know that there's corruption, and we know that there was cheating and intimidation. And if we do not get that straight in this election, there won't be any chairs like this here, because there will be one leader out there. We need to get our hands around it, and you got to do what you got to stand up, and you got to be proud of America. That's all I have to say.
All right, we have a few questions. Senator Bernier.
Thank you so much. I've worked over the years very, very hard to get special voting deputies, both Democrat and Republican, to assist in the nursing homes, because this was a huge complaint that we had. And I am disheartened that we did not, if the Election Commission, worked as hard to try to find out ways to follow the current law than to disregard it and create a whole different process that doesn't follow the law. For example, full PPE and whatever else, to somehow make it work. But this has been a huge concern of everyone's, and I'm going to have to, we are going to have to address this legislatively again in some way, shape, or form. And one of the things that I have thought about, so was your father already voting with a special voting deputy? Was your father already a registered voter?
I believe he was a registered voter, but he hasn't voted since probably, my brother took him to vote 5 or 6 years ago. That was the last time that he voted. So I don't know if he stays registered. I believe he does. I don't know.
No. No, that's the whole point of deactivating voters who have not actively voted. He may have been on that list to be deactivated because of lack of voter participation over a 4-year period is what they're supposed to do. But every time we try to clean our voter rolls and deactivate voters who have not participated in the electoral process for this sort of reason or others, we always find ourselves in court with basically Democrats challenging the process. I don't understand it myself, other than it gets rid of the opportunity, such as this, to cast a vote for an elderly, frail elderly individual who doesn't understand the electoral process. So then the calls come in, such as you may have called. Did you call the Wisconsin Election Commission and ask them about this?
No, I won't. I called, called Jeremy Deansfeld, my state person. When I only found out 3 days ago. And the other thing is, it would be different if a person like that would call myself, my brother, my sister, and ask, would you like us to help your father vote? Because we are shut down right now. The nursing home that he's at, I can't even go visit my father because there's only one person that's allowed from our family to go see him. And now they don't even want to ask us if he needs help to vote. I mean, there are good people out there, but like you said, when there's an opportunity to cheat, someone's going to volunteer for that position and make it happen. And there's over 300 some nursing homes in the state of Wisconsin. So if they only harvested 10 votes from each one, it's 3,000 votes.
Mr. Schneider, were you willing to provide your father's name in the nursing home that this occurred at?
Sure. It was my father's William F. Schneider, and it happened in Mount Calvary at the Villa Loretta.
What was that?
The Villa Loretta.
Okay, very good.
In Mount Calvary. It's the only nursing home there.
Sure. Any other questions? Representative Murphy.
Thank you, Mr. Schneider. And, I ran into a similar situation myself when I was doing doors. So I knocked on a man's door, and a middle-aged man comes to the door, and he asked me, he said, well, how do you happen to stop by my door? And I said, well, we have lists, and the lists are based on who voted. And he said, well, could you tell me, is my father on your list? And I checked the list, found the father's name, and he said, my father doesn't know when election day is, and he doesn't know who's running. And we're trying to work often.
And he's an American, too.
Yeah. And we're trying to work off in recent voter lists because we want to call on those people that are actually voting. And, yeah, so it's very similar, and I can confirm what you're saying. Thank you.
Representative Sartwell?
Yes, I don't know the specifics of the assisted living facility you're talking about, but can you tell me offhand? Do you know who operates that? Is it a local person, or is it owned nationally?
It's owned by the Ignatian Hospital, I believe, in Fond du Lac. It used to be run by the nuns, and she ran into problems financially when people live so long from dementia, for the need of their care, that she got bought out by the hospital in Fond du Lac, I believe.
Thank you.
All right, we have no other questions. Thank you for coming here today and your patience.
Thank you.
Next, we have Debbie Moran. Debbie Moran. Two more.
You can go ahead. Okay. Hello. I think I'm bringing up the end here, and I a lot of the things that have been told to you today have pretty much echoed my experiences as well. So I guess what I'm looking at is I feel like to give this some context, I think when you look at the way this is viewed, you have election administrators who believe that their job is to remove every single last barrier there is for anybody who wants to vote. And that's what they want to do, and that's the only thing, exclusively what they want to do. And then you have, what happens is if that's the only thing they think they have to do, they're missing the other part of their responsibility, and that is to ensure there are safeguards to the voting process so we can make sure that there's integrity. And that's, I think, where the rub comes, where you get that they feel like you're looking over their shoulder. They think that's none of your business. What are you doing in Milwaukee? This isn't where you live. You know, you're trying to play gotcha with us, and you're trying to show how bad we are. So I think that's some of the things we're looking at. So my observations, I've been observing since 2008. My observations for this particular election center mainly on absentee voting, which we know this time just went off the charts, and our system was not really set up to be an absentee voting state. That was kind of, we came out of the old, you had to have an excuse, and then it started getting opened up a little bit more, and then we had in-person absentee voting. So, you know, if you were thinking not to let a good crisis go to waste, this was a fantastic crisis that you could not let go to waste. So, but all you needed then, you had the motive, but you needed the means and the opportunity. So COVID-19 presented the opportunity, but you didn't have the means. Well, I don't know if you're aware of it, but since fiscal year 2010, the first year that we got HAVA grant money from the federal government was 2018. And it was for election security grant from the federal government in 2018 was approximately $7 million. Then they gave us another for election security, $8 million in 2020. On top of that, they gave us an additional $7.3 million apart from what they gave the state for other things for CARES Act. That was CARES Act money as it related to elections. So now we're looking at your means. You're looking at a total of $22.1 million that was given to the state of Wisconsin that you could use for elections since 2018. Just imagine if you wanted to make sure you opened this up and everyone had a chance to vote. Oh, it was all the money you could spend on doing that. So that even wasn't enough when you start to look at some of the private money coming in, but that was the public money. That was the money that came from the federal government. So that's just what I kind of like the context of this. And so I observed on election night at the Central Count in Milwaukee, or on election day, I'm sorry, on election day at the Central Count in Milwaukee. And then I also observed during in-person absentee voting in the city of Milwaukee. And one of the requirements for the municipalities where absentee ballots are canvassed is to post a statement of the number of absentee ballots that the clerk has mailed or transmitted to electors and that have been returned by the closing hour on election day. So I pretty much went to that website before I went into in-person absentee voting. Before I went into Central Count. And the numbers the day before the election, the number before on November 3rd, at approximately 6 a.m. in the morning, the website read 181,525 ballots were issued, 165,269 were returned. That was basically what was updated by the clerk on the 2nd of November at 7:30 in the evening. So that was what was put on the website at 7:30. I looked at it at 6 in the morning before I went in. About approximately 9 p.m. at Central Count, I was told directly by the executive director that I had the final numbers for the absentee ballots, and I waited to get them. Had to wait till they came in from the absentee ballot drop boxes, had to wait till they came in from City Hall, had to wait till they were scanned into the system, and then she posted the final numbers. When she posted the final numbers, I didn't look at it when I got home that night, and the next day I looked at it, and the numbers were off. Now, they weren't off by a lot, and I could not get an explanation from the city of Milwaukee. There were 997 more ballots that they said were issued, absentee ballots issued, from 7:30 at night the night before the election until 3:24 in the morning the day after the election. And I'm thinking to myself, how did they issue 997 more ballots? Because all the absentee ballot request deadlines were over, and there was a discrepancy in that number. As a result of that, the ballots returned, there were 178 additional ballots returned from the numbers she told me. And so my question is, what happened to those? Were they rejected because they were returned after the final count, or were they not? And then my question then became, Central Count's the only ones that have to do this. And there were, 8 municipalities just in Milwaukee County alone that had central counts. And I was wondering about the discrepancies they might have posted. So that's what happened at Central Count. During in-person absentee, I was observing at Zablocki Library, and I started noticing assisters coming in. And I started wondering where they would sign on the ballot. So this is what I found out by asking this question. This is a regular ballot that's processed. Someone else referred to a skinny ballot. I'll show you that. This is what a regular ballot looks like, okay? And on the back of it, you're supposed to have, according to the statute 6.82, the certification of a voter assister. And if someone assists you and assists a voter in marking the ballot, they're supposed to sign that. Here is the skinny ballot. It's called an express vote ballot. This is what it looks like. I got it from my clerk, so they wrote sample to make sure that we're not taking a ballot. It's blank. You take this and you put it in the computer, and you pick your electors on the screen, and it prints it on this ballot along with a barcode. The tabulators read the barcode. They don't read who you pick. Unlike this one, it reads it what a voter's hand has marked. Here, it reads a barcode. Over 61,000 people in the city of Milwaukee alone during in-person absentee used this particular ballot. Now, reading barcodes, from what I'm getting from cybersecurity experts, is a problem. And there's people that have studied this, and they have said that the current ballot marking devices, that's what this is called, the current ballot marking devices, you cannot audit those because they're not contestable and they're not defensible, and there's no way you can prove that what was used in this ballot reflects what happened in the election. So that's a whole nother, that's all, I started researching all the information that they had when they approved these machines. It happened in December of 2019. ES&S was asking for approval earlier. They needed to get a special approval waiver because part of it is called Express Link, which is software and one piece of hardware. And though Express Link was not approved by the Election Assistance Commission, like we've told that we only approve machines that are approved by the Election Assistance Commission, Express Link was not. So they had to go through a special verification process before they could get that approval. But back to the in-person absentee voting site, when I was there, I'm going to ask you a question. I'm going to stop you quickly, just simply because the chair here doesn't know the answer. And apparently I don't either. The skinny ballot has a barcode. State law requires us to have a ballot that is countable. We are supposed to be able to sit down and hand count ballots. So if all we get back out of that machine... No, I'm sorry. It also prints
who you voted for.
Okay.
Yeah,
all right.
It'll print the names in there. It won't print like in this one. You get to see all
I
the
wanted to make
choices.
sure everybody here, including in Wisconsin Island,
right,
understand that's not all that comes out on that is a barcode.
No, but all
who you
that,
voted for
okay,
comes out on there.
Who you voted for, the name of who you voted for without all your options, just who you supposedly selected that is corresponding to that, supposedly corresponding to that barcode. But the tabulator itself does not read your selections. It reads the barcode, which then it's translated from the computer onto the ballot, and they're doing a kind of a translation. And I'm not going to get into all the possibilities of where they say there could be problems with that, but the experts are saying, generally speaking, when I research what election officials say and what I research what cybersecurity people say, it's not the same thing. Election officials say everything is great. Cybersecurity say, you know what, it's not. There's issues here that need to be looked at, and they're not the same. So I'm in-person absentee, and I'm noticing these assisters coming in. I get perturbed. I heard some of the testimony here where they were coming in and actually orchestrating. I've witnessed that, where they orchestrate. That's not the intent of assisting. The voter is supposed to be in charge of the process, and the voter is supposed to ask for assistance, not being told what to do. I watch them being told, and they might be nervous. I'll give them that. But the assisters are orchestrating it and telling them where to go. So I went to the chief inspector. I said, where in this ballot can they mark? Can they signify that they're assisting? She said, yeah, that's a problem with these ballots. There's no place for the assister to sign. So this is, by law, an illegal ballot. There's no place for an assister to indicate that they assisted. But their remedy to that was to have them sign their certification of assistance on the envelope. So I go, okay, on the certificate envelope, I go there, I read. When you sign that, what you're saying is, I signed the envelope for the voter because they were unable to sign it for themselves. That you did not sign that I was assisting in marking the ballot. So at the recount, when I observed at the recount, I went to the ES&S accounts manager, and I said to him, is there a place where an assister could sign on this ballot? He said, well, maybe if you didn't touch the outside, or you didn't touch the parameter of it or something. He said, but we didn't do that. And I said, I know. So, that's an illegal ballot. And he said, we brought that up. Now, I didn't get a chance to open records this is what he told me directly. I heard it directly from him. He said, we said that could be an issue, and we were told, don't worry about it, because the machine that they're using is considered assisting machine. So that would satisfy that statute. And I thought, that's not coming from anyone who has observed in a polling place, because that's not what that means. That means a person helping you vote, whether it's in front of a express vote machine or if it's in a regular voting polling place or voting booth. So when I observed at Central Count, so that's it on that stuff. When I observed at Central Count, I did not. Here it is. Other observations. Contrary to the Wisconsin Election Commission guidance, I did not observe the ineligible electors list consulted as part of the routine absentee ballot canvassing process in Milwaukee. And then I quote what it says, that the Municipal Board of Absentee Ballot Canvassers shall compare the certificate envelope to the list of ineligible voters provided by the Department of Corrections. If the absentee voter's name appears on the list, the Municipal Board of Absentee Ballot Canvassers must challenge the ballot. I also observed that when a voter's name did not appear in the printed absentee ballot log that they were using, the standard procedure was just to handwrite their name at the bottom. They didn't consult a registration list to see of their registration status. They just added them to the list, which I think was standard. And then the other thing I noticed when I was observing, and what people said about how you couldn't see all the tables was really true. I remember observing at a table, and I had a chance to mention to them, I said, you guys must have drawn this short straw because you're right on the edge where you got to deal with us. Everybody else doesn't have to deal with the observers. So we kind of joked about that. But this whole thing about putting the problems on the EL 104 on the inspector report is not really followed. I think they do it maybe for rejected ballots, but that's about it. And I know that when I was observing at one table behind me, there was one of the election inspectors that was having a problem with a particular ballot or envelope. And he started giving his objections, like, I don't like this and I'm not sure about that. I really don't think we should count this ballot. And the supervisor said, no, that's not an issue you're supposed to be dealing with. That's an issue that you're supposed to just look here. You got it all there. You need to count it. And he wasn't going to give up. So I had suggested, well, maybe to satisfy him, why don't you just put it in your 104 that there's an issue, indicate what it is, and then go ahead and count the ballot. And what I was told by the supervisor was basically, this is where we count votes. Let us count the votes. You can look at everything at a recount. And I thought to myself, well, yeah, you can look at it, but there will be no documentation. So it won't matter anyway. But as everyone has testified at a recount, you don't really get to see much of what you're looking for. So I think the main thing that, as I'm looking at this stuff, this is coming down from WEC and from the administrators. I don't know if you know how slowly, and maybe it's gone a little more quickly now, that we're privatizing our election process. On February 18th, I don't know if you know that the My Vote website went down for people to find their polling place. And as a result, on Election Day, that was on the primary, as a result, voters were sent to the Democracy Works website. She shares official polling data with the Get to the Polls, which is run by the Voting Information Project, a partnership of Democracy Works and the states to provide official information to voters on where to vote and where to get their ballots. So Democracy Works is a private organization. If you look at some of the people that are on the board of directors, you'll see that they have very much of a progressive persuasion. In September, I received a recorded message from Marcelia Nicholson, the chairwoman of the Milwaukee County Board of Supervisors, inviting me to consider becoming a poll worker. If I was unable to join a phone conference at a particular time, I was directed to sign up at this website, not the Milwaukee County, not the city. I was directed to sign up at Power the Polls. So you go to Power the Polls, and that's another private organization that's helping run elections, nonpartisan, helping us with running our elections. Then I was reading through the board materials for the Wisconsin Election Commission meeting in September. In there was this big report on how we're going to be ready for the November 3rd election. It's huge. You can see it in the board materials. I ran across a memo from Claire Woodall Vogue. Okay, I ran across a memo from Claire Woodall Vogue, and she said on August 19th to a U.S. congressman, this was a question posed to her. How does your office plan on reducing the time voters spend on November 3rd? She said, I have worked with local organizations, and then she named them. Souls to the Polls, Fight for 15, and the SEIU in order to recruit more poll workers. Then another question in her reply. Do you plan on utilizing additional National Guard troops for the November general election? Since becoming executive director, I have hired a new deputy director who has a background in community organizing and leadership development. He has an extensive professional network. So you heard about the Center for Tech and Civic Life. And then the last thing I want to say, when I heard this guy, to listen to this guy talk about his father, the Election Commission, I listened to the Election Commission meetings. They decided not to send the poll worker or the special voting deputies in, who are by protecting the integrity by being bipartisan. They decided to say, no, we're not going to do that. Here's what Megan Wolf said, and this was reported by the AP on September 10th. She wrote that advocates for the elderly and the disabled don't want deputies in the facility. Advocates, so these are the same private groups, that they don't want them in there because they're supposedly protecting the health of the people in there, which they could be doing. But I have to tell you, so then the commission staff worked to bolster the training for nursing home workers so they can help residents fill out their ballots. They did that when they had a second chance. One of the commissioners on the election commission gave them a second chance to do this virtually, to say, let's do it through FaceTime, through Zoom. Let's take our appointed special voting deputies and do this virtually. Have the people in there, but have them watch and observe. That was shot down. So they preferred to go with the people they'd rather work with. So in closing, I just want to give you a really interesting observation that I made at Milwaukee Central Count. And I think it seems to illustrate the warning of people have quoted this. I call it privileged voting, the warning of privileged voting, where the legislature finds that the privilege of voting by absentee ballot must be carefully regulated. As I watched, it was later on in the evening, I saw the workers raise their hand and the supervisor came over, and when that happens, I want to see what's going on. And they said, we had a problem here. They had a sufficient City of Milwaukee certificate envelope. So that meant everything matched. They had, the signatures were there, the addresses were there, everything was good. So the envelope was great. So now they're going to open it. When they opened it, it contained a marked absentee ballot for the village of Germantown in Washington County. Now, how that happened, I have no idea, but that's what's happening with absentee balloting.
All right, very good. That is your 20 minutes. We do not have time for questions.
Okay.
We have one last witness today, and that is Scott McDonald, appearing via Zoom.
Ken.
Sometimes this microphone's not the best, so I just want to...
Scott, thanks for your patience today. I thought it was important for you to hear some of the allegations that are made by some of the folks today, so you'd have an opportunity to respond to them. But thanks for all your patience today, and you can go ahead.
Yeah, thank you. I will start by saying that I emailed my testimony and the legal brief my attorney filed with the Wisconsin Circuit Court on the matters before this committee. So hopefully you got that and were able to refer to it. I've been adding a few things to my testimony as the day went on, so it will be a little bit different, but it's mostly the same. I invite you to review that brief if you have specific questions. In that case, Judge, I think it's Simonek, who was appointed by Justice Rogensack, ruled this morning against the Trump campaign's effort to overturn the election results and ruled that the election was run properly according to the law. He specifically noted that the objections mentioned here today were in fact legal, including filling in witness addresses, the use of drop boxes, the issues surrounding indefinitely confined voters, and all the other issues raised. So some of you may have opinions about what the law should be or how it should be interpreted, but the courts get to decide what is legal and what is not, and they have ruled. Obviously, that'll be appealed to the Supreme Court, but Justice Rogensack's chosen judge ruled today. Dane County just completed a totally transparent recount of the November election. The results of that recount was certified unanimously by both Democratic and Republican canvassers. But the recount showed that there was absolutely no evidence of voter fraud in this election, even after looking at over 300,000 ballots and an almost equal number of absentee envelopes. I'm proud of my staff and the many tabulators who risked their health to ensure the transparency of this election over 9 days. I also want to thank the observers and legal teams for both campaigns for their professionalism during the recount. We were able to collaborate and make the recount run as well as possible given the circumstances. And I had a very good working relationship with the Trump attorneys, the Biden attorneys, and we all worked together to make the process more efficient and transparent. There have been several concerns raised about the election to date, mostly related to absentee ballots. If these were genuine concerns, they would have been raised or litigated before the election and in every county in the state. since these procedures were followed in every county. These concerns would not be raised only after the election and in just the 2 counties that provided the largest margins against President Trump. In 2016, the Green Party claimed that Donald Trump did not win the election in Wisconsin using similarly evidence-free claims of fraud. The Green Party asserted that the voting equipment used had been hacked using imaginary computer models and far-fetched conspiracy theories. I said to them at the time that their claims were wrong and that there was no fraud or hacking, and that after a recount, Donald Trump would still be the winner in Wisconsin. Unfortunately, the same tired arguments have been brought up again. In Wisconsin, we have a paper ballot for every vote. We audit the results to make sure the equipment works properly, including testing the barcodes and the express vote marking. We test the ballots and the software multiple times before the election. In fact, and I know Senator Bernier, you know this, there's a public test performed in every community in the state prior to the election. And the way that works is we code the election in Dane County ourselves. We test it ourselves. Then we send that media and the ballots out to the communities, and then they test it again just to make sure something hasn't happened in that interim time. In Dane County, we publish every ballot image to the web after the election so that anyone can audit the election and match the ballots to the election night results. So again, the barcode argument, you can see what is the name on that express vote ballot, does it match the results that were on our website on election night. I would say more counties could do that, and I think they should. It is really disheartening to hear these claims again, this time, 4 years later, especially since they were panned by Republicans 4 years ago when it was the Green Party. Again, I have been consistent on the integrity of our electoral system over both recounts. The only thing in that time that's changed is who's won and who's lost. I note the irony of having a restricted invite list this hearing that does not include municipal clerks, the election commission staff, or even other county clerks from Republican parts of the state. Several of them came down to help me in the recount as a favor and because they believe in the integrity of our voting system in Wisconsin. It's as if there's a concerted effort in this committee to not be confronted with the truth that there is no evidence of fraud and that the election was run exceptionally well. I don't know what else explains prioritizing radio hosts and out-of-state people over Wisconsin election professionals. As Judge Ibis, who was appointed by President Trump, said recently in a similar Pennsylvania case, charges of unfairness are serious, but calling an election unfair does not make it so. Charges require specific allegations and then proof. We have neither here. This is true here as it is in Pennsylvania. On behalf of the voters of Dane County, I strongly object to any effort to overturn the will of the people who voted in record numbers in the 2020 November election. Now, I do have a couple of notes I made from some of the testimony today. I do appreciate the testimony of Commissioner Knudsen. There should be a bipartisan review of our laws and make improvements and clarify processes so that we don't have some of these problems in the future. Our democracy is at risk, and we need to protect it. Also, there was a negative comment about me and the recount in Dane County. I just want to set the record straight a little bit. The president's attorney, Mr. Trupas, said on the record at the recount, on behalf of the Trump campaign, we all want to express our sincere gratitude to this incredible board. We have been treated with the utmost respect, civility, professionalism, and courtesy throughout this entire process. It's a difficult process, and there's a lot of tension, and I thought Scott, you, and the rest of the board really diffused all the situations that could have otherwise gotten ugly. But instead, I think this process worked seamlessly, and that is to your credit. So as you know, even though we have opposing political views, perhaps we can certainly treat each other with professionalism, courtesy, and respect. That's a sign of our democracy, and that is the thing that does make us great. And we are thankful that that has been that this has been that kind of process, and we appreciate you very much. Thank you. So I did appreciate those remarks from Judge Troupis. Excuse me. Now, I am the only clerk who was invited to testify. Here's the testimony of the Beloit City Clerk, Laura Stotler, which she asked me to deliver. If you are anything like me, you are confused and frustrated with elections and politics, and you feel like you no longer know what to really believe. Who is telling the truth, and who can we trust in this polarized political environment? Who has the actual facts? Heck, even trying to understand why I'm unable, perhaps uninvited, to testify here today is a little confusing. My understanding of public hearings has always been that they are held in order. They are held in order for any member of the public to weigh in and provide you, the governing body, their position on a matter in an attempt to sway a decision one direction or another. Today's public hearing allows only invited testimony. Ironic is the fact that many of you here from today will likely be making claims about what they couldn't see or hear during the election, even though we didn't say invited observers only. Never in all of my time visiting the Capitol have I been so unclear in understanding of what the governing body is intending to do with the invited testimony they solicited. But since the public notice stated that it was for the 2020 general election review, I feel I needed to try to testify to the accuracy and integrity of this election in my community, which I believe is reflected throughout the state of Wisconsin. Late this afternoon, I learned, disappointingly, I would not be allowed to do so in person. Didn't make the cut. For those of you who saw the musical Hamilton, you are familiar with the scene called The Room Where It Happened, and the lyrics that ends the scene with, the art of the compromise, hold your nose and close your eyes. We want our leaders to save the day, but we don't get a say in what they trade away. We dream of a brand new start, but we dream in the dark, for the most part, dark as a tomb where it happens. I've got to be in the room where it happens. So I sure wish I could testify in the room where it happens, but instead I write as a former county clerk of 8 years and a current municipal clerk treasurer of 6. The 2020 presidential election was my 42nd election where I was responsible for administering a fair, transparent, and accurate election in my capacity. And 2020 was no exception. Not to mention the safety measures needed due to a global pandemic and the historic increase in absentee ballots as a side effect. I'll share some facts and conclusions about the Wisconsin election, specifically the 2020 general elections, from my view as a clerk. By sharing these facts and evidence, perhaps I will shed some light on assumptions that have been made as a result of so many groups whispering or sometimes screaming in our ears about things like fraud, partisan cheating, or the stealing of your most precious voice in government, your vote. Perhaps seeing it from my view, way down here, I can show you that Wisconsin was and is actually a superior election model to the other states in conducting fair, transparent, and accurate elections. Finally, perhaps I can provide you with enough evidence of nonpartisan community participation to help you understand and believe in Wisconsin election protocols as the best possible practice, and to witness that the election was accurately certified through the combined participation of independents, Democrats, and Republicans alike. First, you already know that the election structure for Wisconsin is one of the most decentralized in the nation, and that was mentioned earlier by, I think, Commissioner Knudsen. Where other states hold elections at a county or Secretary of State level, we know that elections belong to the people, and therefore we hold elections at the most local level, the municipal level. This creates additional layers of checks and balances that no other state offers. Imagine for a moment how many layers or players would have to be aligned and agree on a way to intentionally defraud an election in the Wisconsin model. Intention is an important word in this testimony. If voters followed all the rules of books and cast their ballot with the intent it would be counted, I only share from you from the lens of Rock County elections, of which I'm incredibly proud to say has a proven record of open, transparent, fair, and honest elections. It has been my experience 100% of the time that believer in Wisconsin elections are only made by those who are boots on the ground, volunteering to be in the action as a chief election inspector, greeter, central count volunteer, special voting deputy, canvasser, or the clerk. I have received scores of emails post-election from first-time volunteers, both Democratic and Republican, who made comments about the value of the training, the security in the process, and the organization of the overall election, all saying they believe in the process and want to participate in the future. Criticisms from this election, in my community have included, concern for the joint drop-box for absentee and utility bills being too hard for staff to differentiate. Limited room for observers to roam or hear the entire voting process due to limitations due to the pandemic. Concerns about in-person absentee ballots not having an application attached, even though we've used the same combined envelope for years without complaint. The abuse of indefinitely confined voters designation for people who are not unable to vote in person due to disability, and others. I don't want to say these criticisms don't have merit, but I am saying that these criticisms may only shed light on gray areas of the current law, of which you are elected to fine-tune. And I'm completely okay with that, especially when done openly, transparently, and with all of Wisconsin in mind. If the voter ID law needs reviewed, you should do so to correct the concerns of the alleged abuse after evidence and proof determine a need. One thing I can be sure of is that if the indefinitely confined abuse exists, it would be abused by independents, Democrats, and Republicans alike. In fact, able-bodied voters come to vote in person on election day without issued absentee ballot in hand, who also claimed on their application that they were indefinitely confined, stating they destroyed it, and election inspectors were required to oblige the voter with in-person voting. It is up to you to put teeth in the law when voters lie about their ineligibility in obtaining a ballot. But it's up to you to throw an already administered election out the window for abuse of a loophole that you allowed since voter ID was in inception in 2011 Wisconsin Act 23. After all, WEC is a partisan commission with both parties appointed by you. When a voter certifies to something and signs their name, it should be the voter who is held accountable under the law, not the WEC, election commission, or the clerk, especially not the winner of the election. Abuse of laws and regulations is a matter of enforcement and compliance, not in determining winners or losers in an election. As I conclude my uninvited testimony, I am just a pure and passionate advocate for the Wisconsin election process. We must be careful to not dilute the rules in order to benefit some and not others. Your oath of office requires you to be careful not to change the laws in order to secure your political position in exchange for your oath and promise of representing everyone in your district. I hope and pray that you feel as passionate about your role in society as I do in mine. And I'm hopeful that my testimony will help for you to see and believe that while the system may not be perfect and will always have room for improvement, that foundation is strong and it can and should be built upon. Changes to election law are made as a result of this election irregularities. They must be inclusive of all Wisconsinites. They must be fair and accessible to every voter, no matter how red or blue their spirit. And they must be made from the standpoint of building a system everyone can trust. And if we really care about this topic today, we will realize that it's not about whether you, the candidate, wins or loses. It's about the win of the people in electing the leaders they want to have in the room where it happens. People they can relate to, trust, and thrive from the outcomes of their good works. I wish I could have thanked you for your time today. And again, that was from the Beloit City Clerk, Lori Stoller. I will conclude with my own comment. Representative Murphy said earlier that if you shine a light on cockroaches, they will scurry away. And I'm going to assume you didn't mean it that way, Representative Murphy, but clerks and election officials are not cockroaches. They are honest, decent public servants that deserve much more respect than they got from this community today. Thank you.
All right, we'll go to Senator Strobel for the first question.
Thank you for your testimony. I'm really glad in your testimony you brought up gray areas. You brought up abuse of loopholes. I think those are things that we wanted to flesh out here, and we certainly have heard some of those, as well as disappointing as it was, some of the bullying or abuse of people at some of the polls. I'm not saying in Madison, but it happened, and it was good to hear that here, that get affirmation of some of the things we've heard. But I want to just ask you a little bit about Democracy in the Park. There were trained election workers at the Democracy in the Park events. Is that correct?
Representative, just so you know, I'll try to answer some of your questions, but the Madison City Clerk was completely responsible for that event. They didn't consult with me. They don't need to consult with me. So I can try to answer a question as well as I know, but if you really should have asked the city clerk or the city attorney to this hearing. But my understanding is, yes, that these are all chief inspectors and election officials who were used for that event.
Okay, well, you do oversee that, and I guess maybe I can just cut to the chase. Do you think that was an appropriate activity? Do you think that was usurping the 2-week early voting requirements that we have in our statutes?
What I would say is that, from my perspective, how the city clerk receives already, issued, these absentee ballots would have had to have been mailed to voters that they requested, and they were delivering them. They weren't, it isn't early voting where you go in and request a ballot or given a ballot. That didn't happen. So I know the city attorney had an opinion about that he wrote, and there was no lawsuit filed, and there was a letter from that was written to the city clerk, but no lawsuit was filed in advance. And I from my point of view, I think that was kind of telling. There was no statute cited and brought to court to stop that event. And so you guys can maybe address that as you go into the next session. But again, I know you say I oversee it. It's true, but the city clerks and the town clerks and the village clerks don't work for me. I can't give them orders. So that's the deeply decentralized nature of our election here in Wisconsin, and it's really just us in Michigan and do it that way. There are advantages and disadvantages to it, but that's part of it.
I hate to think the only way to determine something was incorrect is by filing a lawsuit against it, but I think from your sentiments and your statements, I kind of get the impression where you might be coming from on that. So that's revealing and helpful in itself. I guess I just have one other question. If you got a ballot that was highlighted or circled or marked up, except to fill in the oval or complete the arrow that needs to be read by the machine, are poll workers or clerks, are they allowed to do that, to actually fill that oval in or complete that arrow if it even looks like it was circled or highlighted or anything like that?
No, they shouldn't be. So let me just repeat this in my own way so that I'm not confusing anything, and feel free to correct me, Representative. But we saw this a lot during the recount where we had to determine the voter intent, and if there were examples of where someone circled Donald Trump or something like that, but the oval was left unfilled, the machine views that as an undervote. It can't see the circling of the name. but in the recount, and so that's how it would be recorded on election night, and no one should alter that. On the recount, if we are presented with that, which we were, in that situation, we would say, well, the voter intent was to vote for Donald Trump, and we would record that as a vote for Donald Trump at the recount. We saw that. We had lots of different examples of that. People would fill in the oval for Donald Trump and then write in Donald Trump. I don't know what they think that helps. It doesn't help. Please don't do that. The machine would use it as an overvote if you fill in the oval for both. And we would again count that for Donald Trump, which we did several times, or whatever the candidate is in that situation. I hope that answers your question.
Yeah, I guess if that's the case, and that's the way I understand the law too, then why is it why is it acceptable to correct or complete the address of a witness or the affidavit on an absentee ballot? Why can you do that, but you can't do what you just got through saying you can't do?
Well, I think there's a difference between marking on the outside of the envelope and the actual ballot itself. All I can tell you is that all the clerks across the state have been following that advice for multiple elections. It was a unanimous vote of the election commission to give that advice to clerks. And I guess I really do strongly object to the idea that you can focus on Dana, Milwaukee, and say those that had that correction done to it need to be thrown out, but not in Waukesha, not in Bayfield, not in Door County. I mean, that is the essence of trying to rig an election. And I just strongly object to that. I can say, hey, we can talk about that policy. You can pass a law that's more specific and overrides the election commission advice. But, and I'm not saying you did this, Representative, but the president's attorneys did. And so I take really deep umbrage to that.
I'll just wrap up here, and if we go back to what you said about fairness, and I know you're not taking responsibility for democracy in the park, but that certainly isn't anything my constituents or anybody else I know of in the state had the opportunity to do. So, but thank you for your testimony.
Thank you.
All right, Representative Murphy.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Mr. McDonald, for your testimony. I just first like to say, before I get into my question, that you brought up my cockroach comment, and I would like to say that we're hearing testimony about elections being held in Milwaukee. I was speaking specifically of that, and I was specifically talking about people who bullied election observers. Do you think bullying election observers is a reasonable way to act in that situation?
No, I hear your point. I just tell you as an election official how I heard it was directed at election officials. I disagree strongly with bullying observers. I said many times during the recount we just did for 9 days that there's no point having a recount if the observers can't see the ballots, if they can't see the envelopes. And I think, we worked really hard to make sure that the observers could see everything. And we tried to, make sure everything was respectful. That transparency of being able to be in the polling place, at the canvass, at the recount, the point of that is to instill confidence in our election system. And I just, so no, I agree with you, and I will take that as what you meant.
Mr. McDonald,
a long day of beating on election officials.
I'd just like to say that my own clerk lives on my street as a neighbor and a friend and a very honorable person, and so that's not the kind of people I was talking about. But the question I had for you here is that state statute, specifically 6.84, directs that absentee ballot processes are mandatory and says ballots cast in contravention of the procedures specified in those provisions may not be counted. In 6.87, it says, if a certificate is missing the address of a witness, the ballot may not be counted. I'm trying to understand why you even have to ask for someone, to give you guidance on that, it would be, it would seem to be totally clear. And if somebody gave me guidance and said, well, this is the law, but yeah, you don't have to do that. That'd be like if I asked some bureaucrat if I could rob the bank and they said, oh yeah, go ahead and do that. That would be fine.
Yeah, I mean, all I can tell you is that, the judge today said that there was no violation of the Wisconsin election laws in this election. This was the judge chosen by by Justice Rogensack from Racine County. And, that objection was not raised 4 years ago by the Trump campaign. It was still in effect then. So I don't know what to tell you other than that's a policy.
But my question was, why do clerks even need guidance on that?
All the election issues. I wish you had Megan Wolf here to answer your guys' questions, and you declined to do that. I guess I'm going to have to be Megan Wolf for I don't know how long, but I wish you'd invited more election professionals from WEC and other places to answer your questions now that we're at this point. I'm sorry, someone's talking.
Guys, I forgot to touch the button, my fault.
Okay.
For clarification, so every absentee certificate envelope has to have a signature from the clerk that says that they got an ID, that they saw an ID, or they're exempt.
Right.
Were ballots in Madison counted without that signature, without those initials?
The initials? No, actually, I don't think so in Madison, but
I would beg to differ on that. I want you to think about that before you answer.
Can I speak, or are we? Can I speak? So there, but to your point, Representative, there were many other communities. I mean, we have 56 communities in Dane County. There were envelopes without initials on them from the clerk, and they were not drawn down. If that were the case, we did not draw down for clerk error. We did draw down many ballots that shouldn't have been counted. There were many that did not have the witness signature. I mean, the witness. Well,
so you just told. Well, hold on. You just told me that you have a fair election, but you're telling me that you counted ballots that were not legally acceptable because they did not have the initial on. So I just want to make sure that we're clear. You counted ballots in Dane County that did not have the initials, which are part of the process to guarantee that the vote will be counted.
They were not drawn down, actually, is what you mean to say, Representative. So what we did 4 years ago and what we did this time is we do not penalize voters for clerk error. The voter did nothing wrong. Their vote is not tossed. If the voter does something wrong, it can be. In the case of not signing the envelope, in the case of not having a witness address or a witness signature, I mean, on that, I was often the 2-1 vote, myself and the Republican member of the Board of Canvass saying, no, you have to be able to refer the item to the DA. And if you don't have enough information, how do you do that? It's the same with nomination papers. I totally agree with you guys when you added the, print your name. Because how am I supposed to refer anything if I don't even know who that is, right? So in that sense, you need to be able to report voter fraud to the district attorney's office. If it's the clerk, and you can see it's been issued by the clerk, the DA can go to the clerk's office. In Madison, what they pre-print, the initials on it. So I'm trying to remember exactly if there were any that didn't, but that kept that from happening. So in Madison, but it was something that happened in many other communities, I'm sure across the whole entire state. We only looked at Madison, Dane, and Milwaukee.
All right, very good. Thank you for your testimony today. I appreciate it, and thanks for waiting until the end. You know, somebody always has to be the last one, and it made more sense to have you listen to everybody's testimony first. So thank you for that patience. And it is 5:38. We've listened to all of our testimony. This was our first hearing. I do believe additional hearings are necessary on these issues. But with that, it is Friday and past 5 o'clock, so I think we've worked hard today. And with that, I'd like to conclude.
This program is a production of Wisconsin Eye, an independent, nonpartisan, nonprofit media network with a mission to inform, educate, and engage citizens of Wisconsin.